So we just dabbled a little bit in Storyboard, gave you a super basic introduction. Let's talk about, like, should you build your app using Storyboard, how you saw with, it's nice and visual, everything's laid out, or should you build everything in code where you have no visuals, you're just coding everything? That's a hotly debated topic in the iOS developer world, but I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of both. And then later in the course, when we build our apps, you'll get a little taste of building it via Storyboard and building it programmatically. And then hopefully you can start to form your own opinion on the debate. So let's start with storyboards. A lot of the benefits of storyboards are, again, the visual layout that you see here, right? It's nice to see how your app interacts when everything's laid out for you. And it actually hides a lot of UI code, right? Here's an example of just laying out one element programmatically. And you can see there's 4 lines of code to set the 4 constraints. Remember, we talked about typically you need 4 constraints. Well, imagine, laying out a whole screen that has a bunch of elements on it. Like, that's a lot of, UI code that clutters up your files. So that is one upside of Storyboard. Well, depending on how you look at it, it could be an upside, is that a lot of that code is on your storyboard, right? You're not actually coding it, you're setting the constraints there. Whereas, when you do everything programmatically, a lot of your code is that UI code. Now, the reason why I said, depending on your point of view, if that's good or bad, some developers think that when you do all that in Storyboard, you're really like hiding it. Like, it's hard to decipher what's going on in the storyboard. You have to click into a lot of things. Whereas seeing it in code, even though, yes, it is a lot of like cluttered code, but you can see exactly what's going on right away. It's not hidden. So again, you can start to see why there's a debate, right? People have preferences. Another bad thing with storyboards is when you're using them on a team, especially a large team. Like, the larger the team, the more difficult it is to work with storyboards. Now, remember the Luna example I showed you, we had multiple storyboards, right? So that is a good way to handle this problem. Because what happens if you have one giant storyboard, like you saw that nightmare on the screen? Well, one thing, that's just a nightmare to deal with. But the way storyboards work, if I'm working on a storyboard and a teammate's working on the same storyboard, we're going to have a merge conflict when we go to merge our code, and untangling storyboard merge conflicts are a nightmare, right? Untangling code conflicts aren't that bad, typically. You can get some nasty ones, but they're nothing compared to storyboard merge conflicts. So again, when you're working on the same storyboard, you're going to get those merge conflicts. That is why it's recommended to separate it out into many, many different storyboards. Because if I'm working on the, login storyboard and you're working on the profile storyboard, now we're not going to have conflicts. We're in 2 separate files. No big deal. And another downside of working with storyboards is just the dragging and dropping of elements. For super simple screens, it's nice. I really like it. However, the more complex a UI gets, where you have tons of views and all different kinds of stuff on the screen, it's pretty complex. It's dynamic. There's animations. Storyboard becomes a bit brutal to deal with, to be honest with you. So my opinion is, like, if a screen is super simple, then I tend to prefer Storyboard. The more complex it gets, the more I start to prefer to do it in code. So that leads me to some advantages of doing it code. Like I've said before, it's very easy to debug things, right? Everything is right there in code. It's not kind of hidden away in the storyboard. It's also easier to build more complex screens because you're not dealing with dragging and dropping elements on the storyboard. It's also easier to make changes, right? So if I wanted to change the color of a button or the font all throughout my app in Storyboard, I would have to go to like each individual element and like change the font of this label, change the font of that label. Like, it's annoying to go through and change all the elements. Whereas if you do things programmatically and you can set like here's my app font as a constant, and you use that app font through all your code, now you just have to go to your constants file, change that one font, and it's changed all throughout your code. So building everything in code allows for a lot of flexibility. It's also good for reusability, right? It's very tricky sometimes to copying and paste stuff from the storyboard onto another storyboard or a certain UI element. It's possible for sure. It just can be tricky and a headache. Whereas copying and pasting just a chunk of code and maybe making some small changes, that is super fast and easy. So like I said, building things in code, while it may be a little bit more work up front, right? It's a lot easier to drag an item onto the view controller, constrain it real quick, done, than to like type everything out in code. But again, you're going to get a lot of flexibility when you build it in code. So again, how I feel about it, it's on a spectrum. The easier the screen on that spectrum, the more I prefer to do it in Storyboard. If it's just super simple, maybe 2 or 3 elements on the screen, straightforward, I prefer Storyboard. Again, as it gets more and more complex, the more I lean towards doing it in code. That's just my opinion. You're going to form your own over time as you build projects in both, but that's a good point. at the end of the day, it's perfectly fine to have a preference. Like, I prefer code, I prefer storyboard. Fine, have your preference. Although a lot of people on the internet are going to tell you you're wrong no matter what preference you choose. That's the internet. But I do think it's very valuable for a developer to know how to do both. And here's why, is because even if you hate using storyboards, you should still know how to do it. Because if you get a job, you get a contract, you join a team, whatever that is, and that project's built in storyboards, like, you're not just going to be able to stomp your feet and say, I'm doing it in code. Like, you're going to have to fall in line and start using storyboard. So that's why I think it's super important to know how to do both. It's going to benefit you greatly to be flexible as a developer. Like, I'm perfectly comfortable with both. You throw me in a storyboard project, I'm good to go. You throw me in a 100% programmatic project, I'm good to go. You throw me in a project that's like a mix of both, I'm good to go. And I think that's what you should strive for. So that's just my take on it. Like I said, it's a hotly debated topic, but I'm hoping in this course I can show you a little bit of both, and you can start to form your own opinions based on experience, not what someone tells you. So, all right, on to the next video. Now that we've learned the basics of the Swift language, let's talk about FizzBuzz. FizzBuzz is kind of like a rite of passage for beginner programmers. It's a short coding problem that oftentimes you'll do when you're just learning a language. So if you ever decide to pick up another language, you'll probably do FizzBuzz in that language as well. But anyway, I'm going to explain the requirements of the problem to you. However, I encourage you to pause the video. Like, of course, we're going to walk through the solution and I'm going to explain everything. But pause the video after I give you the instructions and try to solve it yourself. Here I am in a new playground. Hopefully you can create those by yourself by now. And you can see the instructions here. A little side note in case you're wondering why my comments look different. I changed the color to white. Again, if you remember Xcode, preferences, fonts and colors, you can change your comments. I just changed those to white in case you're wondering how that happened. Okay, so here are the instructions. Write a function that iterates through numbers 1 through 100. And as you're going through that list of numbers 1 through 100, if the number is divisible by 3, print fizz. If the number is divisible by 5, print buzz. If the number is divisible by 3 and 5, like the number 15, that's when you print FizzBuzz with the exclamation point. And then if the number doesn't meet any of those requirements, go ahead and just print out that number. Now, when I'm solving problems like this, oftentimes I'll break out a pen and paper or maybe my iPad and my Apple Pencil, actually get some use out of it. But don't worry about coding this right away when you're trying to solve these problems. Like, again, if you're going to take this on your own, bust out a pen and paper and start kind of scribbling down like some, we call it pseudo code on, what you would do. For example, like if the number is divisible by 3, do this, right? So another hint is that everything you need to solve this problem, we've already covered in previous videos. So if you find that you're solving this problem with stuff we haven't talked about, you're probably doing it wrong. All right, last chance to pause. Don't look it up either. We're going to solve it right here. Don't Google it. So anyway, last chance, pause right now. After 2 seconds, I'm going to continue. 1, 2. All right, let's go. So let's talk through this first. And again, this is how I would try to tackle these problems, again, with pen and paper in hand to take notes. So, okay, we need to write a function. Okay, so we're writing a function that iterates through numbers 1 through 100. Okay, I see iterates through numbers. I'm thinking a for loop, right, with a range. Okay, so I'm going to write a function with a for loop 1 through 100 to iterate through that. Okay, and then for numbers divisible by 3, print fizz. Okay, so if that number is divisible by 3, I have to print fizz. Okay, so I know how to do an if statement. I know how to print out fizz. How do I know if the number is divisible by 3? Well, do you remember the modulo operator? Well, remember that returns just the remainder? Well, if something is divisible by a number, the remainder is going to be 0, correct? So if you use the modulo operator on the number and the remainder is 0, well, you know it's divisible by 3. Cool, so that's how you handle the is divisible by. So I guess the same thing applies for 5, right? Use the modulo operator on 5. If that number equals 0, print buzz. But now we run into this case here on the third line for numbers divisible by 3 and 5. Okay, because right, if we check for a number that's divisible by 3 and then just move on, well, what if it was divisible by 5 as well? So we can use the and operator to check. Like if using the modulo operator on 3 equals 0 and modulo 5 equals 0. Cool, now we know it's divisible by both. Okay, so, and then of course, if the number doesn't meet any of those qualifications, we're just going to print the number. Okay, so it looks like we're using if statements, modulo operators, for loops, and a function. But the order matters. Remember, like I just said, like we can't just check for if it's divisible by 3 and move on. So we should probably check first if it's divisible by 3 and 5. And then if that's not true, then move on to 3, then move on to 5. So that's kind of the order that we're going to do it in. So let's actually start writing this. Func run FizzBuzz for I in 1.100. So that's going to go 1 up through 100. So we're going to get all those. Okay, there's my for loop. All right, so now we have our for loop, and it's telling me I haven't used I yet. We're going to use I. Remember, our first check is going to be if it's divisible by 3 and 5. So let's do that. So if I modulo 3 equals 0. So this is us seeing if the number divided by 3 has a remainder of 0. That's what we're saying here. And we want to use the AND operator. So AND, remember we went over that, I modulo 5 equals 0. So here is this case handled. So now we want to print. This is where we print FizzBuzz. We got it. So let's actually test this. So down here we actually, remember, call your functions. So run FizzBuzz. So now let's see if this is working so far. And this is another thing you want to do, is you want to test your code along the way, because if you just spend an hour writing out all this code and then you test it, it's a lot harder to debug if something goes wrong, because you have all this code like, what went wrong? Whereas if you kind of test it along the way, like right now, we only have this small piece of code. So it's very easy to know where the problem is, if there is a problem. So let's run this. And it does print FizzBuzz 6 times, but we don't know what the number is. So let's actually add something here temporarily. So again, string interpolation, I. That will print the number after FizzBuzz. So run it just to check. So 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90. Yep, those are the ones that are divisible by both 3 and 5. And again, I just wrote that to check. So we know that's working so far. We can delete that. So now we can stop this with this little stop button down there. Okay, so that's the first check. So the next two checks are very, very similar, right? Else if I modulo 3 equals 0. So this is the circumstance where we're checking if it's just divisible by 3. So this is where we want to print fizz. And now we do else if I modulo 5 equals 0, print buzz. And you know what? Let's actually keep that in here just to check, right? So again, string interpolation, string interpolation, because this will print the number after it. And then again, string interpolation, just to check. I know that's not part of the instructions, but this will show you that it's actually working like we showed before. And then else, right, if it doesn't meet any of the requirements, being divisible by both 3 and 5, divisible by 3, divisible by 5, we want to print just I. So there's our quick function. Again, let's run through it just to really reiterate. We do a for loop going numbers 1 through 100. If it's divisible by both 3 and 5, that's what we check first. We're going into this. We're printing FizzBuzz. If it's divisible by just 3, we're printing fizz. If it's divisible by just 5, we're printing buzz. If none of that triggers, we're just going to print the number. So now let's run FizzBuzz here, and we'll make this real big so you can see it, right? Scroll up to the top, right? 1, 2, fizz for 3, 4, buzz for 5, fizz for 6, right? And I'm not going to go down through the whole line, but you can see our FizzBuzz is working, and then we get our first FizzBuzz at 15, which again makes sense. So, and you see we go all the way through 100, doing fizz and buzz if it's divisible by 3 or 5 respectively, and then both. So again, FizzBuzz is a classic rite of passage. You're probably going to see this a lot throughout your programming career when you're just learning other languages, should you decide to explore those. But as always, if you have questions on how we came up with the solution or concerns, leave a comment or hit up the Slack channel. See you in the next video. All right, we're about to build our very first beginner app. We're going to keep it simple, don't worry, but in this video, I'm going to show the overview of what the app is going to be and some of the topics we're going to learn throughout the next couple of videos. The functionality is actually very simple. As you see on the screen, we're going to have a table view that populates with 50 random colors. And then when you tap on one of the cells, we're going to pass the data of what that color is to the next screen and change the background color of that screen to the color we selected. Looks super simple, right? But we're actually covering a decent number of topics in this app. For example, we're talking about UI table views. That's a big thing for developers, right? There's table views all throughout apps. That's probably the most common thing you're going to build. We're also talking about UI navigation controllers, for loops, arrays, passing data from one view controller to another. Like that's another big skill. And then also generating random numbers, which we've kind of touched on already. And we're going to create an extension on UI color that will spit out a random color for us. So again, the functionality looks pretty simple, but we're actually covering a lot of topics. All right, let's get right to it. Of course, to start this app, we got to open up a new Xcode project. So pull up Xcode, create new Xcode project, single view application, next. Hopefully you've done this before by now. Product name, we're going to call this random colors. And again, team is whatever your team is, organization name, etc. Swift and storyboard. Hit next. And save it to, I'm going to save it to my desktop. You can save it to wherever you like. And I'm going to make my Xcode fill up the whole screen here. Okay, cool. Click on your main.storyboard. And what I'm going to do here, as I just make room here for my giant resolution screen, the things I do for you. So you see we get a view controller from the start. We get a view controller file. It's our initial entry point here, as you can see in this arrow. So they do give you a basic setup. I'm actually going to tear all this down and build it back up from scratch because I think that is better for you to understand how this all comes together. So if you click on this storyboard, that bar up there, just hit delete. That'll get rid of that. Click on the viewcontroller.swift file, right click, delete, move to trash. That is gone. Cool. Now you can see we have this empty storyboard here. So what I want to do is hit the plus button. Or you can do Command Shift L if you remember, but you can hit the plus button, view controller. There we go. Okay, all my sizing of my screens are all messed up. You go away. Whoa, yep, okay. There we go. So here's my one view controller on the screen. You see I no longer have that initial entry. We'll come back to that in a second. But the way the storyboard works is all the view controllers on the screen have to be connected to a file. Remember, we had that view controller file. They were automatically connected. Again, I'm going to show you how that works. So in your random colors folder, do Command N to get a new file. Cocoa Touch class. Sometimes we'll do Swift file, which is just an empty Swift file, and we have to type everything ourselves. We're going to do Cocoa Touch class, so that'll fill in some of the boilerplate code for us. I'm going to name this colors table VC. Now I'm doing VC short for view controller. Some people will type out view controller every time. As you can see, that just becomes a really long name. I think it's also redundant. I just do VC. That's a personal style choice. Name it whatever you like. You can see subclass of UI view controller. That's what we want. We don't want to create the zip file, and then the language is Swift. So hit next and create it in your random colors file. Now I just like to move these up so they're all next to each other. So now back on the main.storyboard, I need to connect this view controller to this color table VC file. The way to do that, make sure you have the view controller selected. Again, I just click on this bar up here. In the identity inspector, which looks like an identity card, you see class. Right now it's just a UI view controller. Well, we need to make this a colors table VC. Hit return. That'll do that. So now this file over here, colors table VC, is connected to this view controller on the storyboard. And you're going to have to do that for all the view controllers that you add. So now we have the view controller that is going to become our table view that has random colors in it. That won't happen for another video or so, but we need to set up the foundation. And the foundation of this app is the navigation, right? We want to be able to tap on a random color and show another screen that has the background color of our selected color. So to get that navigation, we need a UI navigation controller. So to do that, again, make sure you have your view controller selected. You can do editor, scroll down to embed in navigation controller, and you'll see we're going to get these two up here. So you see we have the navigation controller on the left and our colors table VC on the right. Just so we can distinguish, let's click on our colors table VC. Make sure you click on this little circle or that's highlighted. In the attributes inspector, I'm sorry, we have to click on the view, not the overall VC, the view, right? Because we're going to change the background color of this view. So as you can see, we get background color. So let's make this system pink just to show that we have it. And you see now we have a nav bar in our view controller up top. We didn't have that before, but because we're in a navigation controller, now we have that. And if you double click into it, you can also do this programmatically. We'll address that later. Let's just call this colors and hit return. So now we've titled our screen colors. And before we run it, there's one more thing we have to do. Remember that isInitialViewController, right? Xcode needs to know what view controller to show first, right? Because right now we just have these two things on the screen. Xcode doesn't know what to show first. So we need to show the navigation controller first because the navigation controller is a container that holds all of our view controllers. I'll dive into that in a second. So click on your navigation controller. And then over here in the attributes inspector, you can see down here is initial view controller. So by clicking this, you see we get this arrow here. So this is telling Xcode, hey, this is the first thing you need to show. So let's actually run this so you can see that in action. Not on Sean's iPhone X, just run it on the iPhone 11 Pro. Run it. And here we are, you can see we have the colors app with the nav bar up top. So you can see the navigation controller is a container that holds this. Let's actually build the next screen before I dive into how the navigation controller works. That way I can actually show it to you on the simulator and it'll make more sense when you can see it in action. So let's stop this and zoom out a little bit. Well, you may not have to. Again, my resolution is just huge. So we need to add another view controller onto this screen. Because remember, this pink screen is going to be our table view that we're going to tap on and show the next screen. So let's do Command-Shift-L, type in view controller, hit return, should put one on the screen, or double click on that, or drag it. Jeez. So now we have this other view controller. Again, the same process. We have to attach this to a file. So in our random colors folder, do Command-N for a new file, Cocoa Touch class, hit next. We want to name this the colors detail VC, and it is a subclass of UI view controller, Swift. Next, save it into your project. Here we have the code. Again, I like to just drag this up so they're there. In the future, as a project gets bigger, you'll create a folder structure. We're not going to dive into that now. But back to our storyboard, now we need to attach this new view controller that we've added to that file. So again, the identity inspector, the class is just blank right now. Let's name it a colors detail VC. Make sure you hit return. Again, if you don't hit return, it's not going to connect it. I've made that mistake before. I'm sure you will too in the future. Hit return. There we go. Now this view controller right here is a colors detail VC. But you'll notice we don't have a navigation bar up at the top. That's because it's not in our navigation controller. Right now, this colors detail VC is just a random view controller floating in the abyss, right? We got to put it into our navigation hierarchy. So what this is called right here, this is a segue. And you can see our navigation controller has a segue to this colors view controller. And this is a special segue, as you can see over here. It is a root view controller. So remember, a navigation controller is just a container. And again, I'm going to explain this more in a bit. So since it's just a container, you have to tell it its initial thing that it's holding, or else you won't see anything. And right now it's holding this pink view controller. That's the root view controller. So now let's add another view controller onto the stack, because again, a navigation controller holds a stack of view controllers. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with the explanation, but let's connect this. So if you click on this pink view controller, hold Control and drag to this next one, and then let go of the mouse, you'll see segues that you can create. So you can create a show, present modally. So present modally is when it slides up from the bottom. We're going to be doing that in a future app. That is not part of your navigation controller when it slides up from the bottom. It's kind of like a temporary context that shows, and then you swipe it down, and then you're back to what you were doing. Do a show segue, that will put it in the stack of view controllers that the navigation controller is holding. So now we have this segue from the pink view controller that we have here, our colors table VC, to our colors detail VC. Now we need something to trigger that segue. And real quick, if you click on the segue, we have to name this. So let's go to the attributes inspector, because what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, fire off the segue named this. So Xcode knows what segue to use. So here in the attributes inspector, having your segue clicked, name it. We're going to say to colors detail VC. Hit return. Again, make sure you hit return. So now we've named our segue so we know how to access it. So now we just have to have an action to trigger that segue. When the app is fully built, that's what's going to happen when we tap on a cell. However, we don't have our table view set up, so we need to add a temporary button just to fire this off. We're going to be deleting this later, but I want to show you how the navigation works before we build out the table view. So hit the plus button. Here we have a button. Go ahead and drag the button onto the screen. Just going to put it in the center. I'll zoom in here. I'm not going to worry about crazy constraints. So here in the alignment, I'm going to do horizontally and vertically in container. Hit add to constraints. So now we're going to introduce you to outlets here. So in order for items on the screen to be able to be used in the code, you have to create what's called an outlet or an action. So here we're going to connect this button to our code. So I'm going to move it over here. And in our colors table VC, because remember, that's the code that's attached to this view controller. So here's our color tables VC. Whoops, back to the main.storyboard. If you hold Option and click on the colors table VC, it'll pull up your assistant editor, right? So here we can have the storyboard on the left and then our code on the right for this screen. So now if I click on the button, if you hold Control and drag, you can create, you see insert action outlet. We want to insert an action. So you see the connection is already in action. The object is colors. That's the title of the screen we're on. So we want to name this temp button tapped. Right, that's what happened. That's the name of our action. Whenever our temporary button is tapped, this is the name of the function pretty much. The type is a UI button, and touch up inside is the default, and sender is the default. That's fine. So hit connect, and now you see we have this code over here, temp button tapped. So whenever our button is tapped, this is the code that's going to execute. So we created an IB action, as you see right here, to connect our interface builder, that's what IB stands for, to our code. And again, whenever the button gets tapped, this is the code that's going to execute in here. So let's execute that code. I'm going to slide this over so it's on one line and looks nice. All the view controllers have a perform segue with identifier function. So if you start typing perform, start typing segue, you're going to get the autocomplete. There it is, the top one. Perform segue with identifier. Again, I'm just going to make more room. It's going to look a little sloppy right now. So remember, this identifier is what we used on the storyboard. Remember, we named it to detail VC. So I'm going to actually go back to the storyboard. I'm going to close out our code real quick, hit this X, and this is just to navigate around screens. So with this segue clicked, if you pull up the inspector, you see we got the to colors detail VC. That's our identifier. I'm going to copy and paste this just to ensure I don't make a typo. And then now let's open up our code on the colors table VC. And now we want to paste that identifier in, right? Because we're saying, hey, perform this VC, and it's a string. So you got to put the quotations around it. And then sender, nil. We don't have a specific sender right now. This is how you can like pass information. We're not going to do that quite yet. So as this reads, whenever our button is tapped on the screen, we're going to perform the segue with identifier to colors detail VC. And again, that is this segue right here that we have clicked is going to be performed. So again, that's what that code does. So now let's run our app. And now when we tap our button, we should perform that segue. And this is where I'm going to start explaining the navigation controller to you as well. So here we can tap our button, and you can see our new detail screen slides in from the right and is on top of our colors VC. So when you hit back, we're back to our colors VC. So again, button to bring in the next screen, back, right? You're probably familiar with this navigation. It's kind of the default navigation for apps. Now let me start explaining the navigation controller. Let me zoom out. So you can see the navigation controller is just a container that holds these two screens. And I always like to compare this to a deck of cards. Imagine your UI navigation controller is holding a deck of cards, and each card represents a screen or a view controller. And as you add new view controllers onto the stack, you're just building up this stack of cards. So when I tap this button, I'm doing what's called pushing a view controller onto the stack. So again, back to the simulator. So right now my navigation controller stack of screens is just holding the pink screen. When I tap the button, now we're pushing a new view controller onto the stack. So right now my navigation controller is holding a stack of screens. At the bottom of the stack is the pink screen. On the top of the stack is the white screen that you see here. So now when you hit back, what you're doing in the navigation controller is you're popping that top screen off of the stack to reveal the bottom screen. And then again, now we're adding that white screen back on top of the stack. And here when I tap back, we're popping that off the top of the stack. So again, if you kind of visualize this deck of cards or a stack of cards, and those are like your screens, all you're doing is adding new cards onto the stack and popping ones off the stack. So that's the fundamentals of how a navigation controller works. I'm going to stop this. We're going to do one more thing to customize this a little bit. If you notice, this is like the old way. We don't have those nice new large navigation titles. So here, if you click on the navigation controller, you see the navigation controller here has an item called the navigation bar. Click on that, and here we can customize that in the attributes inspector. So here we see prefers large titles. Click that. And now we're going to get the large title when we run it. And you already see it on the screen right here. That is the more modern look of the app. So now when we run it, you'll see that that's what we get, right? Colors, that's the more modern look. Button, and then you go, you get that animation up into this back button for free. Do you see that little cool animation, how it animates back and forth? There you go. You get that for free by using the large titles. So that is the basic navigation of our app. We have all that set up. Again, we're going to turn this pink view controller into a table view in the next video. And then in the video after that, we're going to write all the code that does all the logic to finalize the app. In this video, we're going to get the basic table view set up. Now, here you are looking at the project. Hopefully it looks familiar. I left off exactly where the last video left off. I didn't do anything in between. You're looking at exactly where the last video ended. Before we dive into our table views though, I want to clean up some of the temporary stuff we did and also give a little side lesson. So let's get rid of this button here because again, that was temporary. So if you remember in our table VC, we have this code here, right? Temporary button tapped. Well, here's the tricky thing with outlets, right? You're going to have this happen, right? And sometimes people will search forever because they forgot to delete like an outlet. So what happens is if you just delete this code, right? You may think, cool, okay, I'm good to go. But now watch what happens when you run this. Like you may think you've deleted the code that creates your outlet, but if I tap the button, oh man, crash. And it's because you've deleted one half of the equation, right? Our button still has, let me go back to the storyboard, still has an outlet attached to it. So if I click on the button, and you can see them by right clicking, and you can see, this has a touch up inside outlet. So what's happening is even though I deleted the code, when I tap the button, this action is still firing off. So I guarantee you're going to have crashes because you deleted the code and you didn't fully delete them. So you have to hit this X button to get rid of this action, to get rid of that outlet. So now once you delete that, now you can finish everything off. Well, I guess just deleting the button would also have taken care of that, but oftentimes you may just want to delete the action there. So now we can delete the button and get rid of that. So again, just keep that in mind. That is one tricky thing with outlets is you have to delete like both sides of the equation, meaning the actual storyboard implementation and also what's in your code. So, okay, we've gotten rid of that. Now let's take our colors VC and click on that. Click on the view because we're going to get rid of this pink background here. So background is going to be just system color, system background color. So the system background color, if you use that rather than just white, that's what will change to black and white if you go from dark mode to light mode automatically. Okay, so here we just have our basic app. Now let's start building our table view. So to do that, let's actually zoom in here. Again, you can hit the plus button, type in table view. Now you see, you're going to get a table view controller. This kind of does a lot for you. However, I'm not a fan of these. You may see some tutorials out there if you're searching for table views that use a table view controller because a lot of the stuff is done for you. However, what I found in my experience is that they are extremely restrictive. If you want to create anything custom with them, it's just a pain in the butt. So I always take the extra minute or two to build my own custom table view. That way I have all the freedom in the world, right? I'm not like restricted. Just my take on it. You may hear differing opinions, but anytime I've tried to use a table view controller, I've regretted it. So we're going to do it the custom way so you have the freedom. So here we want to take this table view, drag it onto here. And you see we're just going to get it there. Now we want to constrain this to the full screen. So by clicking on the table view, so we click on our TIE Fighter down here, and we don't want to constrain to margins. Make sure we click that off because we don't want to have a built-in margin. So here we want to constrain it to the view, which is going to be 0. We want it to pin it right to the bottom of this colors navigation bar. Same thing here, view, 0. And again, we're not messing with the safe area, so make sure you hit view, 0, because on the bottom, the safe area would be right above the home button indicator, and our table view would just stop right above the home button indicator. And we want it to look like it fills up the whole screen. You'll see what I mean once we have this built, and I'll try to remember to point that out. So once you have all 4 of those constraints, no constraint to margin is clicked, hit add 4 constraints, and you can see it filled up the whole view. That's what we want. And then with our table view selected, hit prototype cells equal to 1, just puts a cell on there. And then now the key thing to remember with table views, oftentimes people will forget, you need to set the data source and delegate. Let me talk through those and we'll come back and explain it. So the way to set those delegates here is by clicking on the table view, and I kind of like to do it from here, from the navigation screen here. So control, drag, and drag it to this circle to this view controller. What we're doing here is we're setting the colors table VC as the delegate and data source to this screen. So we're connecting the two. So if you let go of your mouse button here, you're going to see outlets. You can do data source and delegate. And I believe if you hold shift, you can click on both. Maybe not. I know there's a shortcut to this. I don't do this very often. So you can see the dot next to it. That means we've set our delegate. And now if you click on data source, let's just hold control, drag to double check. Yep, we have our data source and delegate. Cool. So if your table view is not working, oftentimes it's because you forgot to set your data source and delegate. let's go back to the table VC code and show you how these two things come into play. So click on the colors table view. Now here, let's delete this code. Our colors table view VC has to conform to those now. So now you do UITableView delegate, you see there, and then UITableView data source. There it is. So by adhering to these two, now we've connected our table view, but we're getting an error that says it does not conform. So if you click on these, you're going to see we want to add the protocol stubs, fix. If I'm going too fast, I'm going to come back and explain this. It's just tough to explain it before I show it. Okay, so that added this to the top. We don't want that in that order. So Command X, you want view to load to be at the top because that's like the first thing that happens in your view controller. And as a matter of fact, now that you see this structure, I'm going to introduce what I like to do. So this is like conforming to delegates here at the top. If I'm conforming to a delegate, I like to write an extension on my class, and this is purely for code organization. So I like to do extension colors table VC, and then here I want to conform to these two. So we'll do Command X, Command V. We're doing the same thing we just did. We're just organizing it a little more. This is all this is. This is code organization. So now I want to cut these table view functions that we just got and put them in here. So this way you'll see all my normal code for my view controller, which you'll see will play out later in videos, is up here in this view controller. Everything that has to do with the table view is down here in my extension that conforms to the UITableView delegate and data source. Okay, so what are the delegate and data sources? Let's start with the data source here. So the number of rows in section. Our table view needs to know how many rows to show, right? We know it's going to be 50. So for right now, we can return 50. And the reason I'm returning 50 is you can see here, this function returns an int. So I have to tell it how many rows, again, an int. So we're going to create a blank table view for now with 50 rows. Eventually, we're going to make this be however many colors are in our array, right? Because we want it to be dynamic. For now, again, just to set up the structure, we're going to put 50. So that has to do with the data source here. Now this is the delegate, self-row at index path. You're going to become very familiar with this function the more table views you create. This is what's called a delegate method. In a simple way, I'm not going to get too deep into delegates. That's a pretty complex topic that a lot of beginner developers struggle with. But just to know the concept of a delegate, I think is beneficial. So the concept of a delegate is, to put it really simply, picture this function just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. When that thing happens, this function acts. Remember how we used to have to always call our functions? Remember, if I wrote run FizzBuzz, I would have to actually call run FizzBuzz to get that function to run. Well, delegate methods are automatic. You don't have to actually call them to run them. Remember, they're waiting for an action, and when that action happens, they run automatically. Delegate methods. Again, that's a much deeper topic. Trying to give you a big picture overview. So the way this delegate method works is self-row at index path. Every time a cell appears on a screen, this function gets called. So imagine you're scrolling through a table view. This function is getting called all the time, right? Because new cells are coming on the screen. So this is where you customize the cells as they come on the screen. We're going to get into that in the logic section of the next video, but I wanted to at least let you know what that does. And again, I'm going to go over that once we have all the code filled in and you can see it in action. But for now, we're just going to return, and you can see, but real quick, I need to return a UITableView cell. So for now, we're just going to return a new empty table view cell, right? That's what this does. I'm initializing a blank table view cell. Again, we're just setting up the structure. In this function is where we would actually set the color it's supposed to be. Again, more on that in a later video. So again, to review these table view methods, this is what tells me how many numbers of rows I need to show, and this tells me what to show in those rows. And like I said, this delegate method just happens automatically. The reason it can happen automatically is because, remember, back in the storyboard, this is why we set the delegate and data source. Remember how we had to connect the view controller to the table view? Well, this is what's telling the table view like what to watch. So that's how that delegate method fires off automatically. So let's run this and see what we got. So here, as you can see, we have the empty table view. We got our colors. You can see the table view bars. And if I slide up, you can see we're scrolling through 50 different rows. Right now, they're all blank. We got to fill it in with colors. But this is just setting up the general structure of our table view. And now, actually, let's go back. And because right now, when we tap on a cell, nothing happens, right? We're selecting it, but nothing happens. So let's close this. And let's go back to our colors table VC. And again, another delegate method that we can implement is, if you just start typing did select, you'll see did select row at index path. Be careful. There is a one that's called did deselect. Don't want that. That's another error that a lot of people make sometimes. So did select row at index path. And now here's where we want to, again, just like we did with our button. Remember I said we were going to replace that button with when you actually tapped on the row. We're going to do perform segue with identifier. It was to detail to color. I'm living dangerously right now, and I'm kind of hoping it crashes. I'm going from memory on what we named this, to colors detail VC. I hope that's right. But if I'm wrong, it's going to crash. And this is the danger of kind of like using the strings, and why I always went back and copied and pasted in the name of the segue that we're firing off. So again, when we tap on a row, we're going to fire off that to details VC. So now let's run it and see if we got our navigation working. So again, here's all of our cells, right? I'm scrolling up and down. Let me tap on a cell. Nope, didn't crash. That means I got the name right. And you see, now we pushed the detail VC onto the stack, and eventually this is going to be whatever color we selected. But again, we're just building the basic foundation in the navigation of our app. So again, we got the basic structure of our table view down. Tap on a row, there you go. Now we just need to fill in the logic on, generating random colors to fill each cell. And then when we tap on that cell, we want to pass whatever color we tapped over to this view controller so it knows what color to set its background color to. All right, let's move on. In this video, we're going to start writing all the logic to populate the random colors in our table view. And again, my project has left off exactly where the last video left off, so you didn't miss anything. Here we are in the colors table VC. So let's think about what we need, right? We're going to need 50 random colors. That's what we got to populate it with. Now, table views always take an array, right? So remember, an array is a list of items. So we're going to need an array of random colors, and our table view is going to populate based on that array. So let's create that array first, and just keep that in mind. Table views and collection views, they need an array of something to show, right? For example, here on the screen, you see a list of my followers on GitHub. Well, in order to populate that collection view, I need an array of followers, right? So that's why table views and collection views are always going to need an array. So let's create that array. So var colors, and that's going to be an array of UI color, and that's going to equal right now an empty array. So to populate that array, we need to create 50 random colors. So to do that, we need a for loop that iterates 50 times, creating a different random color each time, and then appending that color to our colors array. Okay, so let's do that here. Let's create a function, func create random colors. Close. So for I in 0 dot dot up into 50, because remember, if I did 0 to 50, that would give me 51. So up to, but not including 50 is what that less than sign means for the ranges. So this is going to count 50 times. And again, we're not going to be using the I, so we can do the underscore. It just takes the I out of it, basically meaning we're not going to use the name of the variable. So here we want to create a random color. Okay, how would we create random colors? Well, rather than writing that here in our for loop, let's actually break it out again to keep the code nice and compartmentalized, and also to help you learn, because you can see how all the chunks of code come together. So I'm actually only going to do one space in between functions. Normally I do 2 spaces, but because my screen is so blown up, that takes up a lot of space. So let's do func create random color, and we want this to return a UI color, right? Because again, this is kind of like a little factory. So real quick, return UI color. That's just a blank one. That's temporary, so Xcode doesn't yell at me with an error. But this is going to be like a factory that we're going to run it, and it's going to spit out a random color. And again, that's why we're spitting out UI color. So here, let's say let random color equals, and here's how you initialize a UI color. So UI color, and you can see we can do, there's many different ways to do it with like hue, display P3, named. I like to do the red RGB, basically. So we need a red value, which is a CG float, green. And the CG float value is a value from 0 to 1, right? Like all zeros is black, I believe. All ones are white. Yeah, I think I got that right. We want a random color. So what we want is a random float from 0 to 1.0, right? It could be 0.76, right? And they combine those numbers. So what I can do is CG float, and we've done this with the int, right? Dot random, and we want a range of 0 up into 1.0. And we want to include 1.0, or just 1. So that is going to give us a random float for the red. And let's actually put this, you can do this with functions, by the way. You can separate them by parameters so it lists them out, because how that was a pretty long one. So now let's actually do this multiple times here. This is going to give us alpha is opacity. So if you have alpha of 0, you're not going to be able to see it. If you have alpha of 0.5, it's going to be like faded out. You're going to be able to see through it halfway. Or 1 is full opacity. We want 1. So here we're creating a random color, right? cgfloat.random. And then now we want to return that random color. Random color. And again, if you have any questions about this function, feel free to leave a comment in the Slack. Again, we just needed a value for red, green, and blue. And that value has to be from 0 to 1. So again, 0.25, 0.48, right? So we're just creating a random value from 0 to 1. So it could be anything random. And then we're going to combine those to get our random color. So this create random color function is what spits out that random color. So now what I can do is up here in our for loop, I can do colors.append, right? Because we want to add a new color every time this for loop goes. And we're adding it to this colors array up here on 13. So we need to pass in a UI color. You can see that's what I need to pass in. Well, here, this create random color function spits out a UI color, returns one. So I can do create random color in this function up here. Tighten this up a little bit. So here, what this function does, called create random colors, was actually, let's call it before I forget, create random colors. That happens in view.did_load. So view.did_load happens as soon as the screen is loaded into memory. So it's like one of the first thing that happens in your view controller. Oh man, I named these poorly. Good example of how naming is important, right? You see how this is create random color, this is create random colors. Let's call this add random colors, just to really like, whoops. Differentiate them. Because see, I put in the wrong function there. That's what happened there. So in view.did_load, we're adding random colors. So that's what's happening here. And then every time this for loop goes, we're going to call create random color, which is going to fire this off, which is going to generate the random colors. So in view.did_load, what happens is our colors array gets filled with 50 random colors. So now that we have our array, we can use that in our table view, right? So down here in our table view methods, remember we put them in the extension, instead of returning 50 for number of rows in section, we can return colors.count. Remember, we wanted to make this dynamic. However many colors are in our color array, that's how many rows we want. So instead of passing in a hard number of 50, colors.count, that number is going to be 50, again, because we're appending 50 colors into that. So now, remember, the table view needs to know how many rows I need to show and what I need to show in each row. So in order to tell it what to show, we need to write some code here in our self_row@indexPath method. So to do that, we need to get access to a variable called cell. So we're going to create that. Let cell equal tableview.dequeue, see reusable cell with identifier. So our cell has to have an identifier here, just like our segue. I'll come back and explain this function in a second once I get this string. So again, in our main.storyboard, click on your cell here, your prototype cell that we added, table view cell here. In the right pane, we're going to have the the attributes inspector. And you see the table view cell, we have an identifier. This is the reuse identifier. Again, more on that in a second. So we just want to name this color cell, right? Keep it simple. Again, I'm going to copy and paste that. Make sure you hit return. That's what actually makes it go. Trust me, so many times I've forgotten to hit return and things weren't working. Silly little error, but it happens. And go back to our code here in the colors table VC. So now I'm going to paste in that string that I just copied, color cell. So now we have this variable called cell, which is our dequeue reusable cell with the identifier of colored. So what cell reuse means is basically the table view controller. Remember, we have 50 rows. Let's actually, I'm not going to run it yet. My code's broke, but I'll put up a picture on the screen. This table view has 50 rows. However, it's not all 50 rows that are populated, right? The iPhone is smart enough to only use what's visible, right? Imagine if you had a table view of 1,000 random colors. Well, that's not all going to get populated right away. That would be poor memory usage. You would get poor performance out of that. So what the iPhone does is it only uses what's being shown. So as you're scrolling, down, as soon as a cell falls off the screen, it gets rid of its data and is ready to be reused for the new cell that comes on the screen. So again, if you had 1,000 rows of cells, only whatever, like 12 to 15. I'm just saying what is visible on the screen are cells that are actually being created. So new cells are constantly being created as you're scrolling up and down. That's why this self row at index path function that we're looking at here fires off all the time. So that is what is a reusable cell. That is a little bit more of an advanced topic, right? I just kind of gave a little overview. I mean, it's not super advanced, right? Like developers should know that. But again, this course is like your very first exposure to this world. Might be a little advanced for that, but yeah, you may have to do a little bit more research on reusable cells. But that's what we're doing here, is we're getting that reusable cell. So now we need to get a color to tell this cell like what color it is. So let's say let color equal, and we're going to do colors. This is how, remember, we can access a certain location in the array. So here's where we would pass in an int. Remember I showed you this, like if I put in 0 here, this would be the first available color in our array. If I did 1, this would be the second color. 2, this would be the third color, and so forth. Because remember, arrays are 0 indexed. So all we're doing right here is instead of passing in the actual int, like hard coding, 45, no, we want to make this dynamic. And by making it dynamic, we pass in index path dot row. So the index path we're getting is right here. This is part of the delegate method, right? Xcode knows this automatically. So even though the iPhone is not creating 1,000 cells like we just talked about, we still do have all the index paths, right? And the index path relates to the number of cells we have. For example, index path.row, when index path.row is 0, that's our very first item in the colors array. So what we're doing here by passing in index path.row is whatever row we're on, send that number. If we're on row 47, index path.row will equal 47. If we're on row 4, index path row will equal 4, and that's how we'll know what color to pull out of the array. Again, if we're on row 4, remember this method is being called constantly, all the time as you're scrolling. So if the one time it gets called, again, we're on row 4, it's the same thing as it being like this, right? And we're going to pull that color at that index out of the array. So hopefully that made sense. Again, feel free to ask questions in the comments, in the comments or the Slack channel, because this is a confusing part. But once you understand this, you're really going to understand table views. So again, feel free to ask questions. Happy to explain this further. So now we have our color that we want. So now we can do cell.background color equals color, the color that we just pulled out right here. And in fact, if you wanted to, like, I broke that out so you could see what was going on. If you wanted to write this code, smaller, you could just do background color equals colors.indexpath.row and not even have this line of code. And that's probably how I would write it, if I was writing a real code base. But I wanted to break the steps out so you could see what was happening. So now instead of returning just a blank normal table view cell, we want to return cell. Remember, this is the cell that we created up here on line 49, and then we told it what background color to be, and then now we are returning that cell. So I'm going to tighten that up right here. So now when we run this, we should be getting, oh, it's an optional. So, okay, good call there, Xcode, forgot to do that. So here, this returns an optional. Like, let me actually retype this and slowly so you can see it. So I can do tableview.dq reusable cell with identifier. You can see right here that cell isn't optional in case it doesn't exist. So if you want to be, again, the easy thing to do is just to do bang because we know it's going to exist. Remember, that's the lazy way of force unwrapping the optionals. And you're going to see developers do that. You're going to see that in code bases, but we're going to do it the right way real quick here. So what we should do is guard let, this is how we're going to unwrap the optional, cell equals tableview.dq reusable cell with identifier string. And then that string we're going to pass in, again, was color cell. Hoping I don't make a typo here. And then else, so this is what happens if this is nil. This is the power of the guard statement. A little bit of a review here. We can return just a blank UITableView cell, and it'll just give a blank one, but it won't crash. The guard statement allows us that early exit, right? That return. So again, if for some reason our cell with identifier color cell is nil, like say in our storyboard, we accidentally delete that cell, this will still, the app's not going to crash, which is what it would have done. It will just return blank table view cells. Still not the experience you want, but your app's not just going to crash randomly and you have no idea what happens. So again, the way the guard statement works is now that we've declared cell, we have access to cell out here, like we already used, and I don't have to, make it an optional. And now Xcode is not going to tell me to unwrap the optional because we unwrapped cell up here. So a little optional review there. So let's run this, and we should get random colors in our array. There we go. Yep, random colors. And as we scroll, 50. So what I was talking about here, like the DQ reusable cell, like, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Hopefully I didn't miscount that. 16 cells, right? So this self-row index path function, right, was called 16 times in the beginning. And then as I'm scrolling, it's constantly getting called. It's getting called. It's getting called. And we're setting the background color to that cell. But again, we're not creating 1,000 cells. We're only creating the cells we need. And that's for performance reasons. And again, back to the, remember our constraint, we wanted to constrain the bottom not to the safe area. We wanted it to fill up the whole bottom view. I just think that looks nicer how we're filling up the whole view. Whereas if we put it to the safe area right above this home screen, let me actually show you that. You'll see what I mean by it. It doesn't look that great. And I'll show you how to edit constraints here too. So clicking on our table view, opening up the right pane, click on the ruler to the right of that. You can see our constraints down here. So you see bottom space to super view. Let's actually delete that. And now we're gonna have to create that again. So let's do bottom space. Whoops, it's got to be, it's kind of content aware, like it knows it's below the safe area. So we move it, drag it up a little bit. Now when we pin it to the bottom here, we have the safe area as an option, and we want it to be the safe area and 0. So add one constraint. You see how it stopped right above our home button? Now watch when I run this. And you're going to see this with all your table views, and I always recommend pinning them to the view, most likely. But now you see when we scroll, we always have that like white bar at the bottom because we pinned it to the safe area. So that's an example of the safe area on the bottom. Again, I think it looks cleaner and nicer when all of our colors like fill up the whole screen. So let's do that again here. So again, we can delete the align bottom to safe area, delete that. And I mean, you can probably edit it. I always find it just safer to just delete it and redo it. So again, the bottom, we want to pin to the view, not the safe area, in 0, hit add one constraint. Now when we run it again, you're going to see how it just looks better, right? It fills up the whole phone. Just looks a lot better than that. So now what we haven't set up is passing the data to the next view controller. So watch when I click a color, we're just white because we're not actually passing that data. So that is the final piece of the puzzle, if you will. Oh, and also a new fun shortcut, Command-Shift-A on your simulator will change the dark mode real quick. Thanks to Jason for pointing that out. So you can test it what it looks like in dark mode, and then Command-Shift-A to go back to light mode. Little fun fact there. Okay, so now let's work on passing the data. So back into our, well, actually, let's go to the color detail VC first. So what we need here is a variable called color. So let's do var color. Now we're not initializing it with anything, a specific color yet, and say this is of type UI color, and it's an optional. Because we're waiting to pass the data, right? This detail VC is waiting to receive what color it needs to show. So that's why this is an optional. If for some reason you use this view controller and it's not receiving a color, you don't want to force unwrap it just in case. So make it an optional. And then, so now our colors detail VC has this variable called color. So in our colors table view, here in did select row at, remember this is what happens when we tap on it. Again, we can create our color just like we did above here. We can do let color equals colors. And then again, where do we want to access, right? We don't want to access 4, 5. We don't want to like hard code that. We want to do the same thing, index path dot row. So again, this is whatever row we tap, that's the number we're going to pass into our color. And now remember before I said we don't have a sender yet. So now the sender in our segue is going to be color. So now whenever you're doing some custom stuff in your segue, you have to write a little bit of code to handle that. Before we didn't because we were just showing the screen. We weren't passing any data. So the code that handles your segue is a function, and we're going to do this up here, back up in our view controller. Let's actually clean up some space here. Is a function called prepare for segue. So if you start typing prepare, this is already built in, and you can see we get it down here, prepare for segue. And here we need to like designate our designation. So I always call this dest VC for destination VC. So let dest VC, again, short for destination VC, equals, and you can do segue because we have this being passed in as a parameter. So our segue has a destination view controller here that is a property. So segue.destination. Now, so this is saying wherever our segue is pointed to, that's what I want this dest VC to be. And we want access to this so we can set the color. And the thing is, like, let me delete destination, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. Destination, you can see it is of type UIViewController. So that's just a generic UIViewController, not our custom one. Now, if you remember back in the colors detail VC, we have our specific colors detail VC that's a subclass of UIViewController. And this colors detail VC that's a subclass has a special variable called color that not a normal view controller doesn't have this color variable that we put in. So back in the table VC, I have to, this is called casting. I have to cast this regular view controller as a colors detail VC. And by doing this, this is letting this variable know, hey, you are of type colors detail VC. And once I know that I have access to that colors variable that most normal view controllers don't have. So now I can do destvc.color, and you see it's an optional. And now I have access to that color variable, again, because we've casted it as a colors detail VC, equals sender. And you see sender when I type that. Let's do that. Sender is of type any. We won't get into this quite yet, but I'll give you a high level overview. Basically, you see when I pass in a sender, that means it can be any type. But when you pass in any type, what this function is basically saying is like, hey, just give me an object. I don't care what type it is, but when I give you this object back, I'm not going to tell you what type it is. You have to know what type it is. So again, by passing color down here as the sender, we pass it in, but when we use it up here, we have to say, okay, this is a UI color as a UI color. So let's run through that real quick. What happens when I tap the row, we're going to get the specific color based on the row that I tapped. That's what's happening here. And then we're going to perform the segue with identifier. And then we're going to have a sender of the color that I just created right here on line 59. So that also kind of triggers this prepare for segue. So we're creating a destination view controller. We have to cast that regular view controller as a colors detail VC so we can get access to the special properties of the colors detail VC, which in this case is just color. And then we are setting the color here on this destination VC as the sender that we passed in, the random color that we tapped. Now, if we go to our color detail VC, we're going to have this color passed, but we have to use that color, right? This is passing the data. We pass the color from the table view screen to our detail screen, and that is going to be captured in this variable called color. So now what we need to do is use that color. So we need to unwrap because this is an optional. So we can do we'll do nil coalescing right now, just to show you the various ways to unwrap an optional. So we can do view.backgroundColor equals color, that the variable right here, but you're going to see it's an optional. So we need to give it a default value. Remember, this is nil coalescing. So this is saying if color has a value, use the color we pass in. However, if it's nil, we're going to use a default value, and we're just going to say UI color dot, let's call it blue. And actually, believe we don't even need to do the UI color. We can just do dot blue because background color knows it's a UI color here. So let's get rid of this, these comments, this boilerplate code here. So again, to review, we've used guardlet here to unwrap this optional, and I've used nil coalescing here to unwrap the optional. You could have done it, with iflet. You could have done it with guardlet. I know you're probably thinking right now, well, when do I use which type of unwrapping? There's really no like hard and fast rules. It's kind of like use the right tool for the right job. And unfortunately, you're not really going to know that until you get more experience. But this is a quick and easy way to unwrap this optional here where we want to give it a default value, right? Okay, so let's run this and see what we get. So again, here's our random colors. Very bluey greeny here at the top. Okay, cool. So let's pick, let's pick this purple right here. Bam, we passed the purple here, and now we have this back button with colors. So back, here we are, back here, back to the top, tap on this green, the very first one, and now we pass that color green and set it to the background color. Now, one thing I'm not sure if you noticed, but this may throw you off, right? Let's run it again. So you see we have this color at the top. It's like a maroon brown, I don't know, it looks weird. If you click on it, it turns gray, right? And we go back, oh, now it's gray. Why is that? Now let's click on this green one. Now let's click on the black one right here. That turned gray. Now let's go black. It's gray. That is because we have a selection highlighted, meaning whenever we tap the cell, it highlights that cell. So what we can do here is in the main storyboard, and if you click on the cell, you can do selection where it's blue. I don't know why it's clicked on blue when it's showing up gray, but you can do none. So that means when you tap on the cell, it's not going to turn a specific color. So now let's stop this and run it. Now when we tap on a cell, it's not going to change color. So let's tap on this orange one at the top. You tap on it, you notice it didn't change color, whereas before it was changing to gray. Let's test it again here on this purple one. Purple, back to purple, it didn't go gray. And again, you've probably seen this in other apps where you tap on a cell and it like turns gray to show you that it's selected. So that is one potential confusing thing with our colors app. Because our entire cell is a color, we're kind of changing the color of the cell. So one quick little fix. Another thing I want to talk about before we finish this video, and this is the last thing, is a little bit of refactoring. And I want to talk about this throughout the apps to give you a little taste of it. So what we can refactor here is this create random color, right? This is a function that the view controller doesn't need to know about this. We can make an extension on UI color, so we can do UI color.random, you know, like how we do UI color.blue.red. We can do .random. That way it spits out a random color, and we can get this function out of our view controller. And it also makes that code reusable no matter what view controller or screen we're on. Whereas by putting this code in the colors table VC, this code is only accessible in that VC. Well, getting a random color, I don't know, maybe we're doing a big time colors app. Maybe we want to use that throughout our app. So let's create a colors extension to add this functionality to UI color and not have it be contained to our colors table VC. So here in your folder, do Command N for a new file. This time we are going to do a Swift file. Hit next. And I always name my extensions the type. So UI color plus ext for the extension. Hit create. Now you see we have colors plus ext. And here we need to import UI kit because it's UI color, remember? So import UI kit. And just so you know, UI kit also imports foundation. So if you have import foundation and import UI kit, that's redundant. So here we can do extension UI color, and here's where we can add some functionality. So let's go back to our table VVC, and we're just going to literally cut and paste. We got to make some changes. So Command X, space that out. So again, that cleans up our view controller, gets a lot of that code out of there. We'll come back to this error in a second. That'll be fixed. So go back to our color extension. Now let's paste this in here. This needs to be a static func, so every single UI color has this. And then we don't want to say create random color. We can be a little bit more simple. We can just name it .random. So when we use it, we can just do UI color.random. And that's it, right? So clean up some spacing here. So now we have a function on UI color that will generate a random color. So all we did was literally just take that code, refactored it out into a UI color extension. By making it static, that means every instance of UI color will get it, not a specific instance of it. So if we go to our colors table VC, now that we don't have this create random colors, I'm just going to rewrite this whole line so you can see what happens here. Colors dot append, and again for the type safety, right? It's expecting a UI color. So because it knows this is going to be a UI color, I can just do dot random. Again, just like I could have done dot blue or dot red, right? We're kind of adding a new color to our repertoire, except it's a random color, dot random. So there we go, colors append dot random. And again, now you see we've cleaned up this view controller. We've refactored that code out into our UI color extension. And again, that spits out a random color here. So again, a little bit of refactoring. In the next video, you're going to see, more refactoring. But actually, you know what? One more thing. Refactoring is fun. I enjoy it. So back to, remember how I said these identifiers that are strings are a little bit dangerous? Because if you have a typo, if I just do two colors detail VC, right? I just deleted that A. That's all, right? Now let's run it just to show you. Now when I try to go to the next screen, bam, crash, right? Something as little as that will crash your app. So this is what we call stringly typed. Again, that's not an official term. It's kind of like some slang. So what we can do is we can create constants for these names, right? And you'll see here what we can do is we can create an enum. So another purpose of an enum is to kind of have constants called cells. And we'll create another enum called segues. So, we have a pretty simple screen where we're only dealing with one table view cell and we only have one segue coming from here. Oftentimes you will have one screen pointing to a couple different screens depending on the user's behavior. So you may have multiple segues. But what we can do here is we can create, again, a static let, call it color cell equal color cell. So we're just kind of putting that string into a name. And it may look like it's redundant, but you'll start to see the safety here. So static let to detail equal, and we'll get this to detail colors VC, right? And you can name it whatever you like here. So you're going to see the safety here in a bit. So you define your segues, your cells, and again, it's not uncommon to have a screen with multiple segues and multiple different cells, not uncommon. So now when I go to write in what identifier I want to use, instead of typing a string and risking a typo, I can do cells dot, and you see I get autocomplete, color cell, cells.color cell. Cool. Same thing down here with segues. Instead of, typing in my strings for the segues, I can do segues dot to detail. So now you can see you get the autocomplete. You're not going to risk a typo. And if you're using this color cell in like multiple places, you don't have to type it out each time. You got it in there in the constant. So that's another nice little refactoring bit that I like to use. So anyway, that wraps up this app. We're going to move on to our next app. We're going to build it first in Storyboard, and then you're going to get your first taste of no storyboard, 100% programmatic UI. Should be fun. Let's go. Let's talk about what we're going to learn building this app. We're actually going to build this app two ways. The first way, we're going to use Storyboard like we built the previous app. So this will be a little bit of review, repetition. We're going to be building on our storyboard skills. But to me, that's just key. Right? Like programming is just like anything else. You can't just watch one video or build one sample and then you know it. Like repetition and practice is the key. I mean, I know table views like the back of my hand. It's because I've built like hundreds of them, right? And I like to compare it to basketball, right? If you're learning how to play basketball, you don't just go into the gym, shoot 10 jump shots, and then go home and say, oh, I learned for today. No, you have to practice, repetition. You have to be getting 1,000 shots a day up. So repetition is a key thing. You've probably heard me go on that rant before, but there it was again. The second way we're going to build the app is the new hotness, the new stuff, and that is building it programmatically. I've touched on in a previous video. There's a kind of a debate, storyboard versus programmatic. A lot of it comes down to preference, but there are some valuable pros and cons that we've already covered. However, in the next few videos, you're actually going to get to see firsthand programmatic UI and start to judge for yourself. All right, let's actually talk about the functionality of this app. And the cool thing about this app is it's an app you could actually potentially use. And that's always a fun thing when you're legitimately using an app you've built. Not sure if you've heard about like some workout programs where they require a deck of cards and then you pull that card, and if it's, the 7 of hearts, and that means hearts equals push-ups, and then you do 7 push-ups, right? And then you kind of cycle through the deck as you do your workout to give you some variety. And in this example, we're using, push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, jumping jacks, but you could replace that with anything you want to practice and use this app. So you kind of saw the functionality there. Basically, this card image here cycles through a whole deck of cards at random, and then you hit stop, kind of like you're playing a slot machine, right? You hit stop, and whatever card shows is what you do on the exercise. And then you can hit restart to restart the timer, and then when you tap rules, the rule sheet will slide up that'll show you, what equals what, right? Like a jack of hearts equals 11 sit-ups, and then you can customize that to whatever you want to practice. That's the overall functionality. Let's talk about what we're going to learn specifically. We're going to learn more about IBOutlets and actions, the navigation, right? Last app, we were in a navigation controller and you learned about that. This app, we're going to deal with those modal presentations that slide up from the bottom. And more practice with the UI kit elements, more buttons, UI image views, labels. And again, a little bit of refactoring once the project's complete. And then of course, programmatic UI. I keep stressing that because that is the big learning thing here for this app. Again, the storyboard is going to be more review and building on existing skills. Programmatic UI is going to be all new exposure. So let's get right into it. In this video, we're going to set up our project and lay out our UI on the storyboard. So of course, come into your computer, create a new Xcode project. Hopefully, you're getting pretty proficient at this now. Create a new Xcode project, single view application, hit next. I'm going to name this card workout. And again, it'll be all your team stuff, your information, Swift, storyboard, hit next. And again, I'm gonna start moving a little quicker because hopefully we've done this a few times by now. Should be a bit of a review. All right, make my screen bigger. Click on our main.storyboard, and here we are. We have our view controller. So I'm gonna make some room here. for my giant resolution screen. And there are ways to rename this view controller, right? Because view controller is just a pretty generic name, but you got to be careful when you do that because sometimes your file pathing will get messed up in Xcode. And again, there is a way to do it. I've just gotten in the habit of actually deleting that file. So right click on that view controller, hit delete, move to trash, that is gone. And then now I just do in my folder here, Command N, Cocoa Touch class, next. And then we'll call this card selection VC, right? And like I said, there's a way to rename it. I'm sure somebody will chime in the comments. I always just take the 10 seconds it takes to create a new file. No big deal. And there we go. So main.storyboard. Now remember, we have to connect this storyboard to that file. So you click on the view controller there, hit the identity inspector. Instead of the class being view controller, make it a card selection VC. All right, we're good to go there. We're renamed. Okay. Now we want to start organizing our layout. So if you see on the screen here, see we got a UI image view that is a picture of the card, and then we have 3 buttons below it. A relatively simple layout. So let's start by adding the big UI image view that holds the card. That's going to kind of be the anchor of our UI. We're going to be pinning everything else to that. So let's do that. So hit the plus button here, or again, Command-Shift-L, type UI image view. So UI image view is what holds the image. Drag it onto the screen here. Now we want to constrain this. Now a playing card is, I believe, like 3.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So to keep that math pretty easy on that conversion on the aspect ratio, let's hit the TIE fighter here. Let's give a hard-coded width and height. So the width is 250, height is 350. So we get that nice card aspect ratio. Connect those two constraints. Now in the alignment one, just to the left of the TIE fighter, we want to horizontally center in container and vertically center in container. So that puts the card right in the middle. But if you looked at our design, it's shifted up a little bit. It's not dead center of the screen like this currently is. So if we click on our UI image view, go to the ruler, which is called the size inspector. I always just call it the ruler. And you see we have our vertical constraints. Align center Y to super view. So click on the edit button right next to that. And now you can give it a constant. So we want to move it up. So we have to do like -100. So if you hit that, now it slid it up 100 points from the center. So the way that constraint works is it pins it to the center and then it slides it up 100 points. So that's how we're going to lay this out. And then we're going to pin our buttons to the bottom of that UI image view. And again, back to auto layout, no matter if this is on a huge iPhone 11 Pro Max or the iPhone 5 or iPhone SE, it's going to start it at the center and then slide it up 100 points. So make sure you hit return there to get that going. Click back on the UI image view. Now in the attributes inspector, here we can set an image. You see right at the top. And now we don't have any images, right? What are we going to set that to? Let's actually bring in our assets, all those card images. Now I have a file set up, but this assets.xc assets, this is where you drop images. So I'm going to attach a file to the description. It'll be a zip file that'll have all these card assets in here, but I already have it queued up and ready to go. So here's like the 2 of clubs, 2 of diamonds, 2 of hearts. So I'm going to select all of these and drag it into my assets here. So this is how you bring in assets into your project. So now we have all of our card assets here. So back to the main.storyboard. If I click on this UI image view, now when I go to image in this dropdown, you see we have all of the cards we just dragged in. So we're going to let's just put the 10 of spades here temporarily just to fill it. More on actually populating these cards in a later video, but we want to just get our layout showing up on the screen. So if you haven't picked up on it yet, the overall process of this video is going to be lay out the UI, connect the UI, and then write all the logic in the code to get the app running. So we're working on just laying out the UI right now. Now pulling up our design again, you can see we have the card and then the 3 buttons below it, right? The stop, restart, and rules buttons. So let's add those buttons. Again, Command-Shift-L, grab the button right here. There we go. Now let's constrain this. So down here in the TIE Fighter, I want this width to be 260. Again, this is just based on design choices, hard coding the width there. I like the height of my buttons to be 50. According to the human interface guidelines, they must be at least 44 points tall and wide, because that's a big enough touch target for a human fingertip. So if you're making buttons that are, the width is less than 44 points or the height is less than 44 points, you're doing it wrong. So I like big, fat, meaty buttons, so I always go for 50. So now you can see, remember when we're setting constraints, we need 4 of them. We only have 2. We just have height and width. So we need to let it know where to be on the X coordinate. So here in the alignment tool, we're going to go horizontally center in container. Cool, add 1 constraint. And then the last one is vertically, right? So back on the TIE Fighter, you can see the top constraint, we want to pin it to the bottom of the 10 of spades. You can see here the UI image view, the little palm tree icon. So if you click on that, we're going to get 51. Let's actually make this, I don't know, a nice even number, 60. So add one constraint, and you can see it moved it down a little bit. So we have our button positioned. Now let's style it a little bit here. So again, on this button, you have the attributes inspector. We have the text color blue. Well, looking at our design, we want to make that white. However, if we make it white right now, we're not going to be able to see it. So I like to set the background color first, which is down here. The background color is going to be the system red color. There you go. Okay, now our button looks kind of, our text looks pretty clashy. So we want to make the text color white. There you go. Now the words don't really stand out. So here we can change the font and the font weight. We're going to keep it system font. However, we're going to drop it to bold and we're going to make it like 19. Again, big, fat, meaty buttons that you can see. So you can play with fonts and sizes all you want if you like to customize it yourself, but that's what we're going to roll with right now. So here we have this button, right? An easy way to kind of copy and paste buttons, that way you don't have to go reformat that again. If you hold Option and then click and drag down on the button, now here you go, and then let go of the mouse button first before you let go of Option. Trust me, that'll get annoying for you. Here we can make a second button. So now we're still in the attributes inspector of this button. Now we want to make this background a different color, system green color. And we want to, well, we forgot to do this on the red button too. So go back to click on the red button. We want to change this wording here in the title to stop, exclamation point. There you go. And then click back on the green button. We want to make this title instead of button. We want it to be restart. Okay, now you'll notice we have red constraints here. That means we haven't fully constrained it. And we can double check that by, again, clicking on that button, clicking on the ruler, scrolling down. You see we just have a height and width. And that's what carried over when we kind of copied and pasted it or duplicated it by holding Option. It'll bring over the height and width that we set. So again, now we just need to give it the X and Y coordinates. However, again, back to the design, we don't want this to be the same width. I mean, you could do 3 buttons top to bottom if you like. That's not the design choice I went with. So we want this width to be, edit, 115. I'll tell you why here. So hit return, and that will make this 115. As soon as we set the other constraints, it'll do that. So let's do that real quick. Here's what we can do. We can hold Control and drag, and I'm showing you multiple different ways to set constraints to this object. And what we want to do is we want vertical spacing of that. And you can see over here now, top space equals 31. You see it down here. Well, now we can edit that, and I want 20 spacing in between. So you can set the constraint and then go ahead and edit the constant. So now we need to know where it is horizontally, like we centered this one. However, for this button, again, looking at the design, we just want it to line up with the left side of the red button. So if you, again, control drag up to the red button, let go. Now you can align leading. If you see that here, that's going to align their leading, which is the left. So leading is the left, trailing is the right. If you're in a left to right language, if you're in Arabic and it's right to left language, those are flipped, just so you know why it's leading and trailing. So now that's going to line those up to the left. And you see when I set the fourth constraint, it gave me that size of 115. Or I'm sorry, the width of 115. And the reason we did a width of 115 is because we want it to line up nicely, right? This red button is 260. So if I make this 115 and the other button 115, that'll give us a nice spacing in between, right? I didn't want to just divide 260 by 2 because then these two bottom buttons would be touching. There'd be no space in between them. So speaking of that other bottom button, hold Option, drag now to the right, and you can see Xcode will kind of snap to it and line it up for you. That's a nice little feature here. So now we're on this green restart button here, which is going to be our rules button. Okay, back to the attributes inspector. Instead of restart, we want this to say rules, hit return. And then the color, instead of green, we want this to be system blue color. So there you go. We're missing some constraints now. Again, back to the ruler button on the blue button. You can see we have our 115 width and our 50 height. That's 2 out of the 4 constraints we need. So we can do this 2 ways if you really wanted to. Just like we did with the green button, we can set a vertical space to the stop to let it know where to be horizontally, or we can pin it to the green button and center vertically. So now it'll be centered vertically with the green button. Both ways are fine. Again, whatever way you want to do it. So now we need to know where to be, again, horizontally. So same thing. You could set a specific distance between the blue and the green, or you could align the trailing with the red. So again, there's a lot of options when it comes to how to constrain your layouts. But here we're going to go trailing, so that way it lines up with the right side of the red button. So now our app is constrained here. Let's run it and see what we got. iPhone 11 Pro, running it. And here we are. You see the simulator on the right. Put it side by side. Looking good. Let's test it real quick on the iPhone SE. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have not tested it on the iPhone SE yet, so it should be fine. But if it's not fine, we'll see. So here's the iPhone SE. We'll put it right here on this side, and we'll see. Should be fine though. It might be tight. It might be tight. It's pretty tight. So what we can do here is, instead of moving the card up 100 points, maybe we only move the card up like 80 points or 70 points from the center vertically, right? Because you can see it's just clipping the top a little too much. So let's make that quick adjustment. Again, stop all the simulators. Back here. And this is what I was talking about. Remember how earlier I said auto layout will do 90% of the work, but sometimes you may have to make small tweaks per screen size? This one we can actually make a tweak and it'll work globally. Again, right, if we change this align center Y here, instead of minus 100, let's go minus 75, just to bring that down a little bit. And then what we can also do is the top of the red button, we have a lot of space in between. So if I scroll down here on the red button, you can see top space equals 60. Let's actually make that 50. There's a lot of extra space there. So now by doing this, by running it on the iPhone SE, that should compact that a little bit and be good to go. Yep, there you go. It's tight, but don't get me wrong. If you're designing for the big phones, you're going to accept a tight squeeze on the iPhone 5, just as long as it's usable and doesn't look horrible. But that was a case where I could make a change and it was going to be fine on all screens. But you can start to see how I may want to make a small tweak just for the iPhone 5 and not have it affect my other sizes. So again, that's where auto layout does 90% of the work, but you have to get in there to really dial in and fine tune if you want your layouts to look perfect on all screens. That wraps up this video on getting the basic layouts. In the next video, we're going to start hooking up our outlets and actions from our items on the screen to the code. As usual, here we are right where we left off. But like I said, in this video, we're going to start connecting our storyboard objects to our code. So here I'm going to minimize the right panel. Let's start making these a little smaller again. I'm going to open up our card selection VC, and then I'm going to hold Option and click on the main storyboard to, again, pull up the storyboard over here on the left. And here in our card selection VC, I'm going to get rid of these comments just to clean that up. Get rid of them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create an outlet from our card image view. There's a difference between outlets and actions. What we did in the last video when we set up our temporary button was just a quick IB action. Let me actually set these up and we'll start talking about the differences between the two. So again, to create these outlets, click on the card image view, Control, drag, and you can see insert outlet or collection. And real quick, let me get rid of that. You can do it from the object on the screen, but if you have a real cluttered and busy screen, you can also do it from your view hierarchy. So here you can see I have the 10 of spades image view selected. I can control drag from the view hierarchy and also create my outlet from here. We want to create it above view did load. So you can see this is going to be an outlet. And again, in a second, I'll explain the difference. So the name is going to be card image view. And it is a UI image view. Now you want to make your outlets strong. Xcode by default makes them weak. Flip them to strong. An Xcode engineer has said, no, they should all be strong. You followed him on Twitter and all that stuff. There was a debate. So change that to strong, hit connect. And again, make some space in between your view to load here. So real quick, a general flow of how your view controller should go, and you're going to start to see that, is your variable should be at the top, then your view to load view will appear, and then your functions. So you're going to see me put my variables and outlets at the top. So what an outlet does, well, let's back up because you're already familiar a little bit with an action. Remember what an action does was, hey, when I tapped a button, actually, you know what? Easier to explain if we actually have one. So let's pull our control drag from the stop button here, and we're going to create an action. So action, and then stop button tapped. That is a UI button. Again, touch up inside and sender. Those are the defaults. That's fine. Hit connect. So here, now we have an IB action. So now I can explain the difference. So the action, like you see here, is what happens when the actual button is tapped. The outlet is what gives you access to this object in code. Right now I have access to card image view, this UI image view. And the reason you need access to that object is so you can make changes, right? So I can do card image view dot image equals, I can put in an image there. Now I can make changes via code. I don't have to make the changes on the storyboard, which you're going to see here because we're going to change the card image view on a timer. So that's how it shuffles through the cards. So an outlet, remember, is what gives you access to that object in your code, not just on storyboard. And let's walk through an example of that, right? Pulling up the design, you see that our buttons, our stop button, our restart button, they're not just sharp edges like you see on our storyboard here. They have rounded corners. There's a corner radius here. That's a styling choice. Well, I can't do corner radius in Storyboard. That's something you have to do in code. So in order for me to have access to these buttons in code so I can make that edit, I have to make outlets to them. So here we go. From the stop button, we're going to call this stop button. Pretty good naming. And again, make sure it's an outlet, not an action. So again, action is when you actually want to do something when that button's tapped. An outlet is to get access to it so you can change the properties of it. So is UI button, again, strong. And again, we're going to create an outlet from the restart button. So restart button, it's a UI button, strong, connect. And same thing for rules. Rules button. And now you see we have outlets for stop button, restart button, rules button. And let's give it that corner radius. So we can do stop button dot layer. This is a CA layer. When you're doing corner radiuses, you have to go down to the layer of the view. Probably too much for the super beginner course. Just know the layer dot corner radius equals 8. And we're going to do this for the rest of our buttons. So copy and paste. And then I can double click there and do restart button, enter. Double click on the stop button, and then call it rules button, enter. So now in view did load, you're going to see we're setting the corner radius of our buttons. Again, I like to line up my equal signs to 8. So before we had sharp buttons, now we're going to have these rounded corner buttons. Let's get off the iPhone SE. I don't even like looking at that thing. So run it. Now here you can see on our app, our buttons are nice and rounded, whereas before there were sharp corners. You can still see those sharp corners on the storyboard. So again, when you want to make property changes to the buttons, you need an outlet to have access to it in its code. And it's not just the initial styling. Like let's say, when the stop button is tapped, we want to change its name. So we want to do stop button dot set title, and we want the new title to be I've been tapped for normal. So now I have to have this outlet to have access to this stop button. So now when I tap the stop button, I'm going to change the title of it. So see stop, I tap it, I've been tapped. There you go. So again, that's why you need outlets. I know I'm like really reiterating this, but I really want to drive the point home for the 1000th time. Okay, so that is the outlets explained. We're not going to do that there. Now, there's a couple things about this code that might stand out, right? It's a little bit repetitive. There's a concept in programming called dry, like don't repeat yourself. It is a rule of thumb, meaning it's not 100% absolute. You should never repeat yourself. There's certainly situations where having a little bit of repetitive code is better, but for the most part, you should try not to repeat yourself. And this is an example of us repeating ourselves, like doing the same thing over and over. In the programmatic tutorial, we're actually going to create a subclass of this UI button that is our custom class that is going to have all the styling in it in the custom class, but that's going to be in the programmatic version. Here I'm going to show you a way to clean this up via Storyboard. So just like we had an outlet for these individual items, we can create what's called an outlet collection, which is an array of outlets. So let's do that real quick. So from this button here, this stop button, control drag, again, we're going to create another outlet right underneath it. And you can see insert action outlet or outlet collection. So let go of the mouse button first. So instead of outlet, we want it to be an outlet collection, right? And now we're going to name this, we're just going to name this buttons because it's an array. So pretend you're naming an array here. So you want it to be plural and you have to give it a type. So this is going to be an array of UI buttons. So you hit connect, an array of outlets of UI buttons, as you can see right here. So now we need to put certain buttons in there. And the cool thing is if you hover over the little dot next to the outlet, you can see on the storyboard which ones are in there. Like, look, I'm going to hover it and stop hovering it. You can see. So we know we have the red button in there. So from the outlet circle in the code, you can drag to your other buttons. So watch, I'm going to drag this to the restart button. Now the restart button is in my array of UI buttons. And the way you can see what's in there, hover over that. Now you can see the restart button and the stop button are in there. Now let's drag and include the rules button. Bam. Now this IBOutlet collection has all three of these buttons in it. So now what I can do, instead of writing this code out 3 times, and you're going to see this isn't going to save many lines of code, but you can see how if we added more buttons to this, it could get kind of ridiculous. But now I can use a for loop to iterate over that array of buttons. I can do for button in buttons. Again, this buttons here is this IBOutlet that we created, which as you can see is an array of UI buttons. And now I can do button dot layer dot corner radius equals 8. So now I can add 20 more buttons into that array, if I wanted to, And this line of code doesn't have to change because I'm iterating over every single button in that array and setting the corner radius to 8. So let's test this real quick. And here you go. The code works just the same. Our buttons are rounded corners. Now, something else we can clean up is we can get rid of these outlets here for our specific instance, right? Just because you put them in an array doesn't mean you can always get rid of them. But in our case, we're not customizing our buttons anymore. I don't need access to these. You'll see as we write out the rest of our code, we don't use them. So what I can do is delete them. So we'll delete all those, clean up the code a little bit. Now we just have those outlets. Hopefully alarm bells are going off in your head right now, I hope, based on what we did last video, right? I just deleted those outlets. However, they're not deleted from the storyboard. So watch what happens when I right click one of these buttons now. You can see our list of outlets here. You can see, okay, so I have the action on the stop button, which is down here. That's fine. We're allowed to have that. We want that. Referencing outlet. You can see I have a stop button outlet. I have to delete this one because that's what we just deleted in code. And you can see it's in an outlet collection, buttons. We still want to keep that. We want to keep it in our collection, but we want to delete the individual one that we had. So that's why, remember I said in that previous video, there are certain cases where you don't want to delete the whole button. You just want to delete a certain outlet that was attached to it. And again, I hope this sticks into memory. I want to pause right here. I've had so many beginners working with Storyboard look for an error for hours that they couldn't figure out, and it's because they had some extra outlet attached that they didn't need. So always check to make sure you've cleaned up your outlets if you're having issues. So again, right click on the restart button. Here, the referencing outlet, we want to delete that. Not the outlet collection, just the referencing outlet. Boom, delete. And then on the rules here, right click that. You can see here, we want to delete the referencing outlet as well. So now we've cleaned up our outlets and we should be good to go. Let's run it just to verify. And there we go, still working. So a little bit of cleanup and an introduction to the concept of outlet collections, which even experienced programmers don't always know existed. I've shown this in a video before, and I've had people say I've been working for 3 years on this. I had no clue that existed. So hopefully you got something out of that one. All right, so let's finish setting up our outlets here, outlets and actions. We've set up all the outlets we needed, but we need more actions, right? We need restart button tapped. So let's control drag here. Let's create a restart button tapped. And again, that is of type UI button. Touch up inside is fine. Connect and make some space there. And now let's add our rules button tapped. And then this should finish up the outlets and actions that we need. So rules button tapped, because again, we want to take action whenever these buttons are tapped here. So again, IB actions for when you want something to be done, IB outlet for when you want to access the properties of that object. So as you can see here, we're setting up our actions to write some code in a later video, but our UI is set up almost. So let's close this one out and get back to our storyboard. We're missing a screen, right? When you tap the rules button, a new screen slides up and shows you the rules of our workout. So let's add that view controller. So I'm going to slide this over here to the left. I'm just dragging around here on that bar. And then again, Command-Shift-L, pull up a view controller. There we go. Drag it onto the screen. So there we go. And we want to present this modally. Remember, modally is when it slides up from the bottom. If we were in a navigation controller, it would slide in from the right like we did in the previous app. So one thing with actions, if you remember when we added that temporary button last time, we created an action from our button, and then I typed in perform segue with identifier. I did that just to show you that if you're doing nothing but a transition from a button, like you don't have to, pass any data or do anything else, you can just directly control drag from the button to this view controller, and it'll create that segue to show it. Now, watch what happens. So we want to present modally. That's what we want to do. But I want to illustrate something. If I do show, it's still going to create this segue here, but you'll notice because I'm not in a navigation controller, we're not going to get the slide over effect. You only get that in navigation. Even though I picked show, it's going to slide up from the bottom. Watch, I'm going to run this here. So hit rules, you see it slid up from the bottom. And then we get this nice iOS 13 card here. So we swipe it down, rules, swipe it down, rules, swipe it down. So let's close this, but I want to change this. I want to delete that segue, and we want it to be present modally just to avoid confusion, because if an experienced developer comes in here, they see a show segue, they're going to be thinking, navigation controller, but why not? So let's name it the proper name here and present modally. And then again, before in the previous app, we got the navigation bar at the top when we were in the nav bar. Now we're getting the card looking thing that's new in iOS 13. So let's run this again because I want to point something out because we're sticking to iOS 13 because this changed in iOS 13. So I tap rules and we get this card, right? I can dismiss this by sliding down, right? If you just drag and slide down, that's how you dismiss the modal pop-ups now in iOS 13. If for some reason you are doing this on like iOS 12, like you can't upgrade to iOS 13 and Xcode 11, what's going to happen, you're going to tap rules, and this is going to fill up the entire screen. And you're not going to have this swipe down gesture to get rid of it. So if you are in that situation, you're going to have to add a button to the screen to dismiss it. So you tap done or something like that, and then it dismisses. Maybe that's a little bit of extra homework. And if you are in that situation, hopefully you can figure it out. If you can't figure it out, of course, leave a comment, hit up the Slack channel. Happy to help. But I think that's a fun little challenge to give those of you that aren't on iOS 13. So, okay, we have our screen here. It's working. Now let's add our label that has all of our information. And actually, it's 3 labels. So Command-Shift-L or hit this plus button, whatever you prefer by now. Drag a label onto the screen here. And now we need to constrain this. First, we're going to open up our right pane here. And then down here, our little TIE fighter, right? We want to not constrain the margins. Don't do that. We want to do 30 from the left, 30 from the right, and let's call it 70 from the top here. And we will pin it to the safe area. Actually, the safe area doesn't matter because we're in our little modal slide down, but hey, it's the same distance. See, view and safe area, distance is the same. We'll keep it the safe area. So hit add those 3 constraints. Now you could give it a height if you want, but again, labels have that intrinsic content size. So you don't necessarily need a height. Labels are one of the few that you don't need that. So with our label clicked, let's type in or go to the attributes inspector. Instead of it being called label, let's call it rules, hit return. We want this to be centered, as you can see in the alignment. And our system size here, we're going to keep it system font. That's fine. You can play around with the fonts if you like. Style, I'm going to go to bold. And then font size, we're going to go to 40. Right? This is real big. Rules right there. And hit done. So that's our first label. Let's go ahead and do Command-Shift-L. Let's add our second label. And let's constrain this again down to the TIE fighter. Same thing. 30 from the left, 30 from the right. And we're going to do 25 and hit the drop down just to be sure, again, from the rules label. So we're pinning this to the bottom of our rules label up here. Hit add 3 constraints. We also want this to be centered. We're going to go system, semi-bold, not fully bold, semi-bold, and make it 18, hit done. And now we need to type out our rules. And we're going to type up here, the value of each card represents the number of exercise you do. Period, hit return. Okay, well, that doesn't work. It doesn't fit, right? We get those ... dots. Well, here you see line break where it says truncate tail. You can decide how you want your label to break up its lines. And we want to do word wrap. And then here, number of lines above it, we have set to 1. That means it's only going to be 1 line. You can set the exact number of lines if you like, or if you pick 0, it'll automatically adapt to the number of lines you have. Now we're missing a line, like we need to know what the Jack, Queen, and King are. So up here in our text here, if you click on it, now when you just hit return, it like enters it, that's fine. But in here, if you hold Control and hit return, now you can have like line spaces in here. So we want 1 line space, and we want to say Jack equals 11, comma space, Queen equals 12, comma space, King equals 13, comma space, Ace equals 14. Now hit return to enter that, and now you can see our label has updated with our rules for our game. So that is our second label, and now we want to have, as you can see on our design, this third label that shows the emoji based on the suits on what exercise it represents. So again, plus button, another label right here, and this constraint is going to be a little different. We're not going to pin it to the edges. We're actually going to give it a hard-coded width, and it's going to be 200. And the reason is for design choices on how we want it to line up, because this label doesn't have to change on screen sizes. Like it's always going to be the same. So we can do a width of 200, horizontally centering container, and then we want to pin it to the top, the bottom of our previous label here. The label that says the value of each card represents, as you can see, and we want that to be 75. And again, how I came up with these numbers, I don't want it to seem like you should automatically know what these numbers are. This was like me, building this app previously and tweaking my design. So coming up with these numbers and how it looks is done in the design phase, not necessarily the coding phase. That's why I know these numbers. So add 1 constraint. So now we need to start filling this with content. So over to our font, again, system font, semi-bold. We want to make this 21. Hit done. Again, these are all things I've dialed in on my design. That's why I know these numbers. Again, let's do Command Control Space to pull up our suits. These are frequently used for me. I was building like a poker app as well, and I built this. So you may have to search a little bit for these emojis, but just like searching for any emojis, right? You type in spade, and you'll get the spades. Mine are in my frequently used, so we'll save some time here. So spade is going to equal push up, cool. And then again, control return to get those line spaces. Command control space to pull up the emoji. Heart equals sit dash up. It's hard to type with this microphone in my face. And again, control return twice. Command control space for the emojis. Add the club. The club is going to equal burpees. And you can fill these in with whatever workout you might want to use. But again, control return twice, not just regular return. Command control space to pull up the emoji keyboard. Super repetitive, I get it. Hit the diamond equals jumping jacks. Okay, now we can hit return, and now you can see our label is here, but we're only seeing push-ups. And then just like this previous label here, number of lines, we have to set to 0. There you go. That'll make it adapt automatically to however many lines you have. And again, that's the labels. It's called intrinsic content size. So that's all we have to do to set up this screen laying out the UI. Maybe you notice something. You notice how on this card selection VC, we have code. So we had to actually create a card selection VC for that code. Well, we can lay this simple rule sheet out on Storyboard, right? There's no logic going on. There's no interactivity. We're just showing a simple rule sheet and then sliding it down. So we don't even need to create a view controller file to have the code. So again, back to the pros and cons of like doing everything in code in Storyboard, and how I said like for super simple screens, I prefer Storyboard. Because again, this is one of those super simple screens. There's no logic. You're just showing the rules, no code at all. Just 100% on the Storyboard. Very, very simple. You don't clutter up all your code. Again, that is just one of the advantages of Storyboards. There's plenty of pros and cons for both, but again, I'm trying to illustrate those to you so you can get experience with it and start forming your own opinion. So let's run this to wrap up this video, and things should be working nicely. So here's our phone. Hit rules, pulls up the rule sheet, and you can slide it down. Do the old Command-Shift-A to get into dark mode. Bam, looks good in dark mode. Tap rules. There you go. We get that nice dark gray looking color for the modal sheet. Slide it down. Command-Shift-A, back to light mode. Rules. There we go. So our general UI and navigation is laid out. In the next video, we're going to start working on the logic to actually make this app work. All right, let's do it. Here we are right where we left off. Now, the only thing that's left for this app is to set up our timer. So we constantly change this, this card view to cycle through all the cards. To do that, we need to create our array of cards as well, and then implement the button functionalities. So let's go to our code here, the card selection VC. As you can see, we already have our button actions ready. Let's start by creating our timer. So up here under our variables here, we'll do var timer of type timer. And then we're going to implicitly unwrap this. This is what this means. So remember we did this before with the color variable in the color table view app, but we left that as an optional, right? We left that as a question mark because remember we were passing the data. That view controller didn't always have that data. It was relying on another view controller to pass it that color. Well, here with this timer, we're going to initialize this timer right away. It's contained within here. So again, you're going to get various opinions on force unwrapping. In my opinion, this is one of the times where force unwrapping is fine. So we're going to do that. And again, that is because here in viewDidLoad, well, actually in another function that'll get called in viewDidLoad, we're going to be initializing that timer and starting it, right? We're not relying on, a network call or another view controller to pass us that data. It's all self-contained in this view controller. So here below viewDidLoad, let's write a function called func_start_timer. And here we can do timer equals, so this is, like I said, we're initializing our timer here, timer.scheduledTimer here, and we want to pick the one that has the selector here that you can see is the third one down. So time interval. This is how often this function fires off. Let me back up a big picture and explain what the timer is actually doing. So we set our time interval, so let's say 0.5 seconds, right? Half a second. So every half a second, this timer fires off and it does something. We have to tell it what to do. So real quick, the target is self. That's our view controller. Selector. Okay, so this is what is firing off. So the selector is where you pass in a function. So you have to do hashtag selector, and you can see it takes in an @objc method. This is a little bit where we're interacting with Objective-C at a lower level. Like we don't have to do anything with Objective-C, but at a lower level, we're interacting with an Objective-C functionality. Let me get rid of this right pane here so it looks neater. So let's write this function that we're going to have to pass in. So at every half second, what function do we want to fire off? We want to change the card that is showing in our image view. So here we'll do func show random image, right? And then that's where we're going to rate that functionality. But remember, this function has to be at objc, right? That's what you see here, at objc method. So now if I pass that in, show random image, I don't know why it was a strike through. We'll do a Command B to make sure we get all of our autocomplete and everything. It's yelling at me because we haven't totally finished this. So let's do that. So this is nil for user info. We're not passing any info to our timer. And then repeats, this is big. You want to set that to true. You can see it takes in a Boolean. So make that true. Because again, we want to run this timer every half second. You can also create a timer that doesn't repeat. So you want to say maybe, hey, after 20 seconds on this screen, show an alert. That would be something that only runs once. Because we're constantly changing our image, we want this to run repeatedly. So that's why we're putting it to repeat. And do Command B so we get rid of that error. Yep, we got rid of it. So sometimes if an error is not disappearing after you fix it, do a quick Command B to build your project, and that'll build it, and you should get rid of any errors. So here we have our timer. Again, every half second, the function show random image is going to fire. Right now, it's not doing anything, but we can test it. So print timer fired off. Right, and then make sure we actually call this start timer function here. So start timer. So let's run this to test it, and we should see in our console just a bunch of print statements firing off every half second. Yep, you can see it right here. Timer fired off, timer fired off, timer fired off. Okay, so our timer is working. Now we just need to, instead of printing something, we need to change the card image view. So we can do, card image view.image equals, well, we need the images. Remember, we brought all these in. I'm actually going to delete this line of code so I can get rid of this error. So Xcode's not yelling at me. So let's create an array of card images, right? So that way we can just pull a random element from the array. So let's go up here and do var cards, which is an array of UI image here, and that is going to equal an empty array. Right now it's empty because we'll populate its images for now, but I want to finish up this code right here. So we can do card image view.image equals cards.random element. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull out a random element from the array. Now you'll notice this is an optional. Hopefully this is a review. Why is this an optional? Because our cards array could be empty, and you can't pull out a random element from an empty array. So we can hit return. Again, there's multiple ways to unwrap an optional. So what we're going to do is just give this a UI image named, and we're going to pass in a string, and we want the ace of spades. That's going to be like our default image should this thing break. Again, that way it doesn't crash if there's like an empty array. So back to my assets here, I can see the ace of spades right here. Well, I'll click everything. There you go. Ace of spades right there is just the string AS, right? So go back to our card selection and named AS. So this way, if the array is empty for some reason, which is empty right now, actually, let's do this. So this is going to constantly, remember the 10 of spades showed up in the beginning. Well, there you saw it switched to the ace of spades because that array is empty. And that's like our default, like don't crash our app, just show the ace of spades. Now, if you were really building a user product, maybe you'd want to like show a joker and say, hey, the cards are empty, something happened, like a fun little empty error state. Again, for now, we're just going to show the ace of spades as our default. So stop that. Our timer seems to be working, but we need to create our cards here, like an array of cards. So as you saw, right, there's 52 cards in a deck, right? So that's a lot. What I'm going to do, instead of creating that array here and really getting this all muddied up with this data, right? Because this array of cards is essentially data that we're going to use. I want to get that out of the view controller so it doesn't clutter up my code. So on the file of card workout, do Command N, do a new Swift file, just blank, hit next. We're going to name this card, hit create. So now we have a file called card that we're going to put up here, and this is kind of like a data model, if you will. And we need to import UIKit because we are going to be using UI image views here, or not image views, images. So here I can create a struct called card, and on this struct I can have a variable. So I can do static var, and we'll explain why I did static here, and I'll show you in a second. But I can do all values, and that is going to equal, and I'm going to fill in this array here, and I'm going to do this on multiple lines because as you can see, this is going to be a lot. So we're going to do UI image. I always forget the second I in UI image. I always do that. UI image, same thing we did with the ace of spades, named, and we're going to do 2 of hearts, right? 2H. And again, if we go back to our assets, here you go. You see 2H, there's the 2 of hearts, and they're all named like that, right? Like, so the 4 of clubs is 4C. So that allows us to create this pretty quickly, actually. So 2H, and we're going to create our array. Well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do copy, paste, 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 paste. We'll see here. You'll see how quickly I can do this here. So this needs to be commas after all this. So watch. If I hold Option and drag down, now I get all these cursors. So I can just do comma. There you go. All that. Now you can see, again, hold Option. Well, that'll come later. I actually have to do this manually, I think. So 2 of hearts, 3 of hearts, 4 of hearts, 5 of hearts, 6 of hearts. You'll see I'm not going to have to do this for the whole deck. I can do some nice copying and paste and batch changing features here. 9 of hearts, 10 of hearts, and then we get Jack of hearts, Queen of hearts, and then I need 2 more here. So Command C, King of hearts, Ace of hearts, right? So KH, AH. Okay. So now I'm going to copy and paste this whole thing. So there's my hearts, right? So copy. Now let's do spades. So now what I can do is, again, hold down Option, highlight all these H's. Kind of sucks because the 10 of hearts messes it up, but highlight all the H's, put a capital S there. Cool. There's my spades. Just change this 10. That's messing me up. And then Option, highlight those H's, make them spades. Boom. There's my spades. We're done. Rinse and repeat for clubs and diamonds. And you see I'm putting this extra space in here. This is just to visually separate, like, so I know, like, hey, these are all my hearts. These are all my spades. These are all my, well, they're going to be clubs. But that's just an optional way that you can add some space in there. So change that to a C for clubs. This is a C for clubs. Again, hold Option, highlight, C for clubs. Cool. Do the same thing for diamonds and we're done. So copy, paste, hold Option, highlight them all, D, change that to a D, and Option, all that. Oop, nope, slipped on the Option highlight there, D. So there we go. So there's my array of all 52 cards based image. I don't need the comma for the last one. And one thing you may have noticed, let me actually retype this last one. So, and it's AD, so Ace of Diamonds. UI image named, and you see it's an optional. So all images are optional. That would be in case you, for some reason, deleted the images from your project. So again, this is where you're going to see force unwrapping used, right? Because we know these images are in our app, right? They're downloaded to our app, like they're in our project. We're not, if you were downloading these images from a server and you could have network issues, something could go wrong. Of course, you don't want these to be optional. But because these are like built into our app, they're assets within our app. Again, my opinion is this is the time when force unwrapping is okay. Now, of course, there are always caveats, right? If somebody were to come in and delete all these assets, then our app is going to start crashing. But yeah, that's what I think of that. So, because again, the proper way to do this would be to unwrap all these optionals. But we're going to hold Option just like we did before and do mass force unwrap here, 1 there. Again, and again, I want to be very clear that you will hear some developers that say that no force unwrapping ever, never do this. And technically, like I said, they're not, by the textbook, you're not 100% wrong. Here's my take on it. And again, programming, what you'll find over your time in this space is that programming is highly opinionated. Oftentimes, I saw a tweet the other day that says, we have a million different ways that we can all write the same thing and get the same results. And every single one of those ways is wrong, according to somebody on the internet. So yeah, so again, I guarantee you there's people that disagree with what I'm doing right now, but my reasoning, and this is the thing, as long as you know why you're doing it and the consequences, then you can make an informed decision. Again, the reason I'm force unwrapping these is because I know these are in my project, right? I'm not downloading these images. They're going to be there unless somebody comes in and sabotages my project and deletes the image. So, but again, like I said, that's why they're technically correct to force unwrap these, or not, I'm sorry, to not force unwrap these, because it is possible for somebody to come in and delete the images. But you've seen what it takes to unwrap an optional. Imagine if we had to unwrap, all 52 of these, right? So again, everything is situational. So anyway, back to card selection. What I can do here in our cards array, instead of having an empty array, I can do card dot all values. And the reason I named it all values is because if you wanted to expand on this, like technically you could create an array of like just the hearts or just the spades, maybe just the face cards, right? If you were making a specific game, then you could do card.face cards, card.hearts, right? You could really, subsection this off. So I did card.allValues. Now our cards array has all those values that we just created. So scrolling down to our random image, now when the timer fires off every half second, our card image view.image is going to be a random element from that array. And if that array is empty or good nil, it's going to default to the ace of spades. So now when we run it, our card should change every half second. Right, there you go. Half second is changing and it's pulling out a random element from our cards array. Now, half second is a little slow, right? Like you can stop. You can pick what card you want. So let's speed this up a little bit. Let's do 0.1. And you can tweak this on your own, dial it into whatever timing you like. But so this is every 1/10 of a second is going to change. So now when we run it, now you can see going really, really fast. Like now I don't know what's coming. I just have to hit stop randomly. Well, we haven't implemented that yet, so we're just firing off forever. So let's stop the simulator and implement the stop and restart buttons. So stop this. So the way to stop a timer is actually relatively simple. It's one line. You do timer, which this is the timer variable that we have up here on line 17 that we created and assigned a value here. So we have access to that timer. We say timer dot invalidate. That's what stops the timer. So when I hit the stop button, now it's going to do that. And now when I restart it, I want to do timer.invalidate. Wait, we want to stop the timer and then restart. That's what happens here. So start timer. So this way, whenever the restart button is, we're invalidating a timer just in case it's already running and starting a new one. Or if it's stopped, the timer invalidate doesn't fire off and we start the timer here. So rules button tapped, we actually don't need that, right? Remember we set that up before to where the button just goes in our storyboard. The button just shows it automatically. So I deleted that code. Let's make sure we delete the action here. I think I might have already done it. Nope, there's a touch up inside action here, right? Rules button tapped. Got to make sure you delete that when you delete that code. And again, we don't need that. We don't need that code when the button is tapped because we based it off this segue. If you remember, we just dragged from the rules right to that and did present modally in the previous video. So that is why we don't need that code anymore. So back to the card selection VC, we should be good to go. But before I run this and finish up the video, one quick note about timers. And again, timers can be more of an advanced topic. I just wanted to use them because it's a cool part of the app. But so the timer is always going to be running once you start it. So when you leave this screen, if you had multiple screens, you always want to make sure your timer's invalidated. So this is part of the view lifecycle method. Just like view did load is what you started with, you can do view will disappear. And so call super.view will disappear. You always want to call the super when you're overriding. Well, not always, but 99.8% of the time. That's the thing with programming, there's almost no absolutes. There's always some exception, but the vast majority of the time, you always want to call the super. And remember what that does is if you're overriding a function on the child, remember the subclass, I should say, you want to get all the functionality of the super class or the parent class and then add your own functionality. If you don't call super view will disappear, you're not going to get all the built-in function of the view controller that Apple has built for you. So that's why you want to be calling the super when you override a function. And then pass in the animated that is right here. We're just passing that through. So here in view will disappear, I also want to call timer.invalidate. So there you go. And real quick, at a high level, there are other view lifecycle methods. Again, so view will disappear. It kind of makes sense. This is what happens right before the view disappears. There's other ones like view will appear that happen right before the view appears on screen. As you can see, view did load. This is what happens when the view controller is loaded into memory. So there's various view lifecycle methods. I'm going to link to a video in my YouTube about that rather than diving in fully here because I explain it in depth quite well in that video. So we want to make sure our timer is always invalidated because again, if we don't invalidate that, it's always going to be running in the background and that's just bad memory usage here. So let's actually clean this up a little bit. I like 2 spaces there, 2 spaces, 2 spaces, 2 spaces, 2 spaces, 2 spaces. Okay, code looks good. Let's run this. Our app should be functional and ready for you to use and get swole and work out. Okay, so timer's running, cool. Stop. All right, 10 of hearts. So I would have to do 10 sit-ups, I believe. Not going to do that. Restart. There we go. We're back up again. Okay, cool. Stop. Done. And restart. And then now when we hit restart still, it still keeps firing off. So we're good to go. And if we ever wanted to see the rules, okay, cool. Those are the rules of our game. Swipe down. Still going on. Stop. 7 of hearts. Got to do 7 sit-ups. So again, if you want to use this app to practice anything, and then, okay, as always, I like doing this. Command-Shift-A, restart, We're still working even in dark mode. Gotta love it. Stop. All right, 8 jumping jacks, I believe. Yeah, rules. Diamonds are jumping jacks. There you go. So yeah, use this app, have fun with a workout or anything else you want to practice. But that wraps up the storyboard aspect of the app. Again, we are going to rebuild this, but all programmatically and do a little bit more refactoring, like I said, with the custom UI button that we're going to create. So again, a lot of this was hopefully review. Again, just repetition, doing drills, building up on our skills. But again, next video, all new stuff. Hope you're ready. Let's go. iOS 15 has introduced new buttons for us. Now, before you get all worried, this isn't like a complete revamp of a button and you got to learn everything new. To put it simply, in the real big picture, these new button configurations are essentially a way to give us Apple-style buttons out of the box so we don't have to recreate them. What do I mean by Apple-style buttons? We'll take a look on the screen. We have a plain style, gray style, tinted, and filled, right? You've seen these buttons in iOS. So essentially what these button configurations do are make it easy to get these styles, right? If you still want your own crazy custom button, you got to do that on your own. But if you want your app to feel like it belongs in the Apple ecosystem and use these styles, Apple now gives them to you kind of for free out of the box. In this video, we're going to convert the buttons you see here in our card app, right? The stop button, restart button, rules button, and we're going to play around with these new styles using these buttons. Now, there's a new WWDC 2021 video that goes into these buttons in depth, because again, we're going to keep it pretty surface level, pretty introductory, because this is the fundamentals course. But if you want to dive deeper, definitely check out that WWDC video. And there's another video I'll attach there all about the new stuff in Interface Builder, which again shows you how to use these buttons as well. Okay, so as you can see, I got my main storyboard selected. You can see the new icons in Xcode 13. I think those look pretty cool. Click on the stop button. And then over here on the right, you'll see the attributes inspector, which I think these might get some new icons. Again, I didn't include that in a whole separate new video, but some of these icons have changed, but they're still in the same spot. But we want the attributes inspector. And you see the main thing here is style, right? So right now it's default. So these are the styles I mentioned, right? Plain, gray, tinted, filled. So let's start with gray. So if I click on gray, you'll notice nothing really changed with my button down here. Here, I'm gonna zoom in on my buttons like even more so we can like make them real big and see them. Now, the reason being is because we still have our background color of system red. So if we get this to default, get that out of there, we'll no longer see that. So now we have gray, but you'll see our text is still white. See this foreground? That's a new attribute, it's white color. So we'll change this again back to default. Now, this is us adjusting our existing button. One thing I wanna show you, again, if you do Command-Shift-L to get your object library out here, right? You see we have gray button, tinted button, filled button. You can drop this in if you were starting from scratch again. So let's say you did want a gray button and we're starting from scratch, you just drop that in and you get that look, right? We only had to like go back and change that stuff because we had existing styles, we had an existing button. Just want to be clear on that. So back to our stop button, I'll click off of it. You'll notice we get a little bit of a corner radius, and that's part of the default style. So click on this button, so you see that's gray, and now that we have like all the defaults set, we can kind of change this around a little bit. So if I want to go to style tinted, right? So now that's the tinted blue, but now I can change the background color. Let's say we want like a red tinted. So system color red, and then the foreground color is also system color red. So again, the foreground color will change your text, the background color will change the background. But when we made them the same color, because this is the tinted style, it gives us that, light red background and dark foreground. Now this is good for contrast ratio, because if you use the same color, you're pretty much guaranteed a good contrast ratio for like visibility purposes. Or sometimes like, white letters on a yellow button, you can't really see that. So this ensures good contrast, or if you just like that look. And then again, back here, we'll go to filled. This is kind of the style we did have, except you see our foreground color is still red. Now we want to make that foreground color, well, you can make it whatever you want, but we're going to go with white to give us that back. So that is the general shape of it, but you'll notice, right, we have a little bit of a corner radius, whereas before on our rules and restart, we had to set that in code. I'll go to the code to see if you remember that, right? See where we have our outlet array of buttons here, and then we do our for loop. Hopefully you just kind of did this a little bit ago, so this is fresh in your mind, where we iterate through all those buttons and set our corner radius to 8. We do that in code, but it doesn't show up on our storyboard. Well, that's another benefit of these new styles is you get the built-in corner radius. We're gonna play with that in a little bit, but first, I wanna delete this code. We no longer need that code. So therefore, I no longer need this outlet collection of buttons. So we can get rid of that. And then remember, go back to our storyboard, make sure you delete these outlets. So right click, you see this referencing outlet down at the bottom in the array of buttons. Get rid of that. We'll do that for all of these. Because remember, it's the thing with outlets. You got to make sure to go back and delete them if you no longer are using them. So cool, that is done. But now you see we get these corner radius for free. Let's talk about this corner radius a little bit. Here you can see on the right, we have corner style, default. We don't get to set the exact number, but you just kind of get, small, medium, large, capsule. So capsule will give us, that circular look that you're probably very familiar with seeing. And then if we want to do we'll do medium, that'll give us a medium corner radius. And then if you notice the dynamic one that you might have seen here, corner style, dynamic, that will change with dynamic type, right? So as the button text gets smaller or bigger, that'll be dynamic. But we're just going to go with medium or pick whichever one you want here. So that is basically the button style. So we went off that with stop. You know what? Let's change this to tinted. I like this look, right? So sorry, style not filled. We'll do tinted. But again, we don't want our foreground color to be white on tinted. We want it to be, system red again to get that color. So let's do the same thing with our restart. Actually, if you want to pause the video and try to set up your restart and rules buttons accordingly, go for it. Nice little challenge. But I'm going to do it right now as well. So again, on the restart button, we want to give it a style of tinted. And then you'll notice, like I said, it didn't quite change it because on our button, we still have our background set down here. Again, because we are using existing buttons, we got to kind of go back to the default stuff. So we'll scroll up. Now we got to make our foreground color. Well, the background not default. We want system blue. And then also for the foreground color, system blue. Again, when you're using the tinted, you want the same color for both. Okay. Oh, actually, this was green. My bad. System green. And system green. There we go. Same thing for rules. Oh, and then corner radius, we wanted medium, right? Corner style, medium. And then we're going to add images to this as well real quick. So let's change our background color back to default down here. Back up here, we want style to be tinted. And corner style, we want medium. And then foreground, which is our text, we want to be system blue. So there you go. Now, let's talk about adding images to this, because this is a nice little free thing we get as well. You see this image field down here, stop. Well, okay, these are all of our cards. We don't want that. But here we get SF symbols. I don't think we've touched on SF symbols in this course yet, but SF symbols, as you can see here, is a separate program that allows you to pick Apple icons, right? They're already pre-made here. So you can see here's a bunch of them. So what's a good stop one? I don't know if this has a built-in search. I guess it kind of does. So yep, we'll do stop with the circle. There you go. And you can see it's a little tight to the words there. So you see you can add some padding here, right? So I'm going to add a little padding. And as I'm clicking up, you can see the image. I'm going to go way far. You can see the padding on there. So put this to a number that looks reasonable. I say that looks fine. We can do the same thing with our restart button, right? Image. I'll do refresh. That's kind of what I have in mind. Yep, arrow clockwise, right? So there you go. Use that one. And then we'll add a little padding here as well to make that look good. And then, okay, so see, I guess I add a little too much padding. You see the restart wraps around. So be careful there. And then rules, let's see here, list. Yeah, that looks fine, right? List, and then we'll give that a little bit of padding as well. So just like that, we added images to our buttons to spice them up a little bit. So, and again, that was relatively easy. Now, before we wrap up, go to the stop button. You can see all this stuff here on the right on the configurations, the weight, the background corner. You can add images, placement, render modes. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can play around with and experiment with. And again, the WWDC videos that I link to will explore this more. But again, great new button system. If you want the Apple default style buttons, you get a lot of the work done for you, which is always welcome. In the next video, we're going to basically do the same thing, except we're going to do it in code on the code version of this app. So see you there. All right, let's begin the adventure into Programmatic UI. Oftentimes, this is kind of daunting for beginners, so we're going to take this step by step. But again, the whole purpose of doing this is so you can see how to build a project in Storyboard and see how it's also built in Programmatic UI, and then start to form your own opinion, in that debate. So, of course, to get started, here we go. We have to create a new Xcode project. Again, hopefully you've done this a few times by now. Create new project and single view application. I'm going to name this card workout dash programmatic. think that's spelled right. Is it 2 T's, 1 T's? I don't know. Who cares? Card workout, programmatic. Again, team, Sean Allen, whatever. Language, Swift. Now here, you may be confused. Interface, Storyboard. Well, I said we're not using Storyboard. So the other option is Swift UI. Well, we're not doing Swift UI, so we have to select Storyboard, and then we got to delete the Storyboard, which is what we're going to do in this video. So hit next. Create it. I'm going to add it to my desktop. You can create it wherever you like. Again, I'm going to make my Xcode fit the full screen here. Let's start minimizing this to make some room. So here we are at the general settings, right? And this is where we're going to start removing the storyboard. So here you see main interface, main. This is going to take you to main storyboard. So delete that and then hit return. Make sure you hit return. Again, that's what actually enters it. Hit it twice for good measure. And then now let's click on main.storyboard and right click it. Hit delete, we're getting rid of that thing, move the trash. Same thing with view controller. Remember that default view controller we get, delete, move the trash. We'll be creating our own. And then the last thing we have to do to like fully rid ourselves of the storyboard on this project is go into your P list right here. And it's best to just search for main. So if you do Command F on here, type main, hit return, there you go. And you see it pulled it up, storyboard name. And you can see how it was kind of buried in a bunch of different settings here. That's why it's easiest to search for it. And then next to storyboard name, we have this little minus symbol. Just click on that minus symbol. There you go. We've removed all references to the storyboard. Because if you didn't delete all those references, Xcode would still be trying to look for main.storyboard and your app would crash because we've deleted it. So now that we're set up to start our project in code, because essentially what we're doing, do you remember on a previous project where we had that arrow that pointed to our navigation controller, and this was us saying like, hey, this is our initial view controller. We're basically replicating that, but in code. And that's actually a theme throughout this whole next series of videos. Everything we're doing, we're replicating everything we've already done on Storyboard, except you just do it via code. So you'll start to see how those compare. Anyway, let's get back to actually creating our initial view controller. So to do that, we go to scene delegate. Now let me make my font reasonable here. And the good thing about writing programmatically, get a little extra space. We can pretty much remove this right pane. Like we pretty much never use it when using code. So the scene delegate, I'm going to give you a high level overview of what this is. Don't worry if you don't fully understand it. This is way past, absolute beginner knowledge level. But essentially what the scene delegate does, and this is new in iOS 13. Prior to iOS 13, this didn't exist. So if you're doing this course and you're still on like Xcode 10 and iOS 12, you're not even going to see this. But iOS 13 introduced having two instances of your app side by side, like windowed mode. And this is relevant on iPads and potentially down the future, Catalyst apps where you can have apps on the Mac as well. So on the screen, you see an iPad with two versions of the app GoodNotes. That's what I use to kind of sketch out some of my apps. And you can see it's two instances of the same app side by side. You can test this yourself. Open up your iPad, maybe open up the Notes app and pull two versions of the Notes app side by side. Again, prior to iOS 13, you couldn't have two instances of the same app. Okay, how does that relate to Scene Delegate? Well, iOS 13 introduced what's called scenes. So each instance of your app, again, the two that are side by side, is a new scene of your app. Because before, all we had was this app delegate right here, and you could only have one instance of your app. Well, again, Scene Delegate allows you to have multiple instances of your app, again, so you can have it side by side like you see on the iPad here. That is the high-level overview of what the scenes are. Again, no need to go deeper. As long as you understand that it just allows your app to have two instances of itself side by side, like on an iPad or down the line a Mac, it's pretty much all you need to know for the beginner. But it is in this Scene Delegate where we're going to write our code in order to show our initial view controller. So you see here guardlet, and remember this empty underscore means like there just has no variable name for it. Well, we want to give this a name because we're actually going to use this scene here that we're getting here. So let's create this window scene. And I do want to preface the next bit of code we're about to write here. Do not worry if you don't understand this. This is a required step, and I'm still showing the code so that you have it for reference. If you do want to dig deeper, or if you want to create your own project later on and you want to do it all programmatic, you have this code for reference to come back and look at. But do not worry if you don't understand how the iOS Windows system works and how all these scenes come together. That is way above the scope of these entry-level beginner course. But again, it is a required step to get to the stuff that you should know and learn, so we're doing it real quick. And first we need to initialize our window. So window equals UI window, and we're going to initialize that with a frame of the window scene, which we have up here on line 20. That's what we just created, right? Dot coordinate space dot bounds. And you know what? I actually considered just copying and pasting this, telling you the high level and not even like typing it out to avoid confusion. Because again, I do think this is unnecessary confusion. So again, I want to stress, do not worry if you don't get what's going on here. And by the way, this window is this window variable we get by default from the scene delegate. And then now we start configuring our window. So window.windowScene equals window scene. Again, we're setting the window scene equal to this window scene that we got up here. And then now this is what matters right here. This is what you should kind of pay attention to. So window, not window scene, window.root view controller. So again, this is us saying like here, this is the initial view controller. Now, we don't have a view controller in our project, right? We deleted that. So let's create one real quick. So in our folder, do Command N, Cocoa Touch class. Again, we're going to create a view controller. Hit next. Remember, this is the card selection VC, right? We did that before from our previous project. Hit next. Create it. Now in our card selection VC, again, I always move it up here. Just to know that we have this, let's actually set a background color to prove that we're showing this one. So view.background color equals dot. I've never done dot brown. It's probably look ugly, whatever. So dot brown, and back to the scene delegate. Now that we have that card selection VC, we can make that our root view controller. So card selection VC, and we'll initialize an empty one. And now the line that makes it all happen is window dot make key and visible. So now we're going to run this code in our scene. And now when we run our app, you should see the brown screen. So let's change this to iPhone 11 Pro, not my phone. Run it. And this should be the setup we need to show our card selection VC as the initial view controller. And here you go, we get this beautiful, beautiful view controller with this nice background. So this proves that we are showing our card selection VC because our background is brown. And this is the initial setup that we need to do to get rid of Storyboard and be done with it. Now I know what you may be thinking. Wow, that was a lot just to get our initial view controller showing up. And you're not wrong, right? When you do a Storyboard, you get all that by default. But again, you only have to do this once when you set up your project initially. And oftentimes when you're working on a project, you're working on it for months. So, it took us a few minutes to do this. It is a small price to pay, in my opinion, to get all the benefits of doing everything programmatically throughout your code base. And before we go, I do want to point something out about this root view controller, right? We made this the card selection VC. Now, remember, this is the root view controller. If you go back to our colors table view app, remember our root view controller was actually not a view controller at all. It was the navigation controller that held our view controllers. So if we were building our colors table view app, this wouldn't be an actual view controller. We would be making the root view controller our UI navigation controller, again, that held our view controllers. Same thing if you were doing a tab bar at the bottom, this would be a UI tab bar controller that holds your view controllers. So again, just some clarification, if you are using a UI navigation controller or a UI tab bar controller as your first screen, you want to make those your root view controllers. Just quick clarification. And again, one last time, please don't worry if you don't understand this, if all this was gibberish. I don't want you to get discouraged by that. This is above and beyond kind of the absolute beginner, like I've said a couple times before, but I really want to stress it. Moving on to the next videos will be a lot less high level, if you will, and more so beginner content. So again, don't get discouraged. Let's move on. In this video, we're going to create a custom subclass of a UI button to handle all the configurations of our buttons, right? As you see on the screen, we have the green button, they have rounded corners, the text is white, it's also bold and a certain font size. So we're going to configure all that into a custom button. Now, during this video, we're not going to get to see the fruits of our labor. We're not going to get to see our work in action. We'll see that in the next video when we start laying out our UI, and you can see how powerful having a custom subclass of a UI button is. So where we left off, as you see on the screen, I haven't changed a thing. This is right where the last video ended. So we need to create a file for our custom subclass of the UI button. So again, in the folder for card workout programmatic, do Command N for a new file, Cocoa Touch class. Now, we've been doing this for our view controllers. Now we need to make a subclass of UI button, right? Make sure you change that subclass of. So the class, we're going to call this CW button. Now, what does the CW mean? This is a convention that if you're making custom elements, like a custom label, custom view controller, it's convention to add a prefix with your project name. So in this case, CW stands for card workout. So this is a card workout button. And in a larger project, you may have different kind of buttons. So let's say you wanted a certain type of button that was during your onboarding or your login screen. So you may have like a CW authorization button. Maybe you have a CW game button. And the reason behind this naming convention is because if you're creating all these custom assets and you just name it button, like that's pretty generic. However, if you name it with the prefix of your project, in this case, CW button, like in the case of Facebook, they do FB button or FB whatever, right? So this will let you know that, hey, this is something we custom created in our project. It's not part of a library. It's not part of, a UI kit or something Apple developed. This is our custom thing. So again, adding that prefix lets every user of the code know that, hey, we made this. So name it CW button, hit next, create it. Now we have our empty button file. Go ahead and delete the comment here. And here we go. We have a fresh start. So let's write our configure function. I'm doing this a little bit out of order just to let you know. We have to have initializers, but I want to have our configure function done first before we write our initializers. More on the initializers in a second. So let's go func configure. So this is where we're going to basically configure the button, right? So for example, we wanted to do layer.cornerRadius, remember, equals 8. And it's the same thing we did via Storyboard. And then now we want to set the title label.font, right, equals .system font. Remember, that's what we picked. And you can see we can do just of size, or we can do of size and weight. So if you remember, we did a font, I believe it was 19, and then the weight, if you hit dot, you can see all the font weights. Again, like I said before, we did all this stuff in Storyboard. We're doing the same thing. We're just doing it in code and not in Storyboard. So hopefully you can see the correlation between the two. So we did bold for the font weight. And then now we do set title color down here, the second one. So the color we wanted was white, right? Dot white. And for control state is dot normal. So you can do, watch, if I do just do dot normal, you can do, what color do you want if the button is disabled, if the button is highlighted. Again, that's detailed stuff. 98% of the time, you're going to just use .normal. Now we do something new. This is when you're doing your UI programmatic. So it's translates, it's a mouthful, translates auto resizing mask into constraint. You may hear it called TAMIC for short. I believe Paul Hudson started doing that. TAMIC as in like TAMIC, right? Translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals false. Essentially what this line means is use auto layout. And you'll see we're going to use this line a lot throughout the code base, so you'll get the hang of it. So here's our configure function. So now let's write our initializers for our custom UI button. And we're going to write 3 of these so I can explain them. So we're going to have the init with frame. So this overrides the UI button init. Remember we talked about a subclass can override its parent's class method. So we definitely want to call super.init here with the frame, and then we'll pass in the frame that we passed in. And then here, why we're overriding this init method is because we want to call configure. We want to add our own special configurations, right? So whenever we initialize a CW button, we're going to get all the normal UI button initialization. That's why we called super, right? That gives us everything Apple built within UI button. And then by overriding it, in the subclass, we add our special little sprinkles on top, if you will. And that's this configure method where we're setting the corner radius, we're setting the font to a certain font, we're setting the font color, etc. And then you see Xcode's yelling at me. Required initializer init must be provided for a subclass of UI button. So all your subclasses in code are pretty much going to have this. And essentially what this coder init is if you initialize this button via Storyboard. Now, Xcode makes us put it in there, but we're just going to keep this fatal error that comes by default because we don't even have a storyboard. So in our project, it's impossible to initialize a CW button via Storyboard, but that's what this initializer is for. Now, maybe you notice something is missing, right? Our CW buttons, yes, we have the corner radius. Yeah, we're making our label of a certain font. Our label's a certain color. But we're missing, like, what is the background color of our button? What is the title of the button say, right? Stop, reset, rules. Well, those are different in between buttons, right? So we can't put those in our configure because that means every button will have the same title or every button will have the same background. So what we can do is create a custom initializer that takes in a background color and a title as a parameter when we initialize the CW button, so that anytime we create a CW button, we have to give it a color and we have to give it a title. That way we can change the background color and title dynamically. So let's create that. Again, we're just going to create an init, and we're going to pass in some parameters here. We're going to pass in background color, and that is going to be of type UI color. Again, this is just like creating a function where you're passing in parameters. And we want to give it a title, which is of type string. So now, anytime we do an initializer, remember, we want to call the super. So super.init with frame. And then the frame we're going to pass in, just do .0. Essentially, this means like, so what a frame is just like you do the constraints, right? It needs to know a height, a width, and an X and Y coordinate. And actually, let me initialize a frame so you can see what I'm talking about. You'll see here, it takes in a CG rect. So rect is a frame. So do CG rect, and you can see the initializer, like I said here, X coordinate, Y coordinate, width, and height. So by doing doing frame.0, you're just putting in zeros all of there. This is kind of like a shortcut not to have a boilerplate. And the reason we can have 0 height, 0 width, 0 coordinates is because we're going to lay this button out using constraints in our view controller in a later video. So anyway, now let's start configuring this where we can do self.background color. Now again, remember we have to put the self in front of it because this background color that's blue is of the same name that this is, right? Like I could have just said color and not named it the same, and then I wouldn't have to do self. So I could just do background color equals color, right? But background color, I'm just going to Command Z back to what I had. Background color is more informative. Just know that if your parameter name is the same name as the actual property on the button, you have to put self in front of it. So that's why you see that. So now we're going to do equals background color, and you'll see this one will be white, which means it's the parameter. The one in blue means it's actually the property on the UI button, or CW button in our case. So now we're setting the background color equal to whatever color we're passing through. And now we can do set title down here, and it takes in a string. Well, we have this title here that we're passing in. So title, again, whatever we pass, and then for control state dot normal. So this is our custom initializer. Again, when we initialize the CW button, we'll have the choice to initialize just an empty one, or we'll have the option to initialize it with a background color and a title. And you're going to see that in action in our next video when we start laying out the UI for our card selection screen that you see here. So let's keep it moving. All right, as usual, right where we left off from the last video, in this video, we're going to lay out the card selection screen that you see here on the screen. Again, just like we did in Storyboard, except we're going to do it via code. So let's actually move this CW button up before I forget. Click on your card selection VC. Here we go. We have an empty screen. Let us not make this .brown. Let's do .system background. And remember, system background is what give you white in light mode and black in dark mode. That's why we do background color equals system background. So the first thing we want to do is start creating our elements, right? We have the UI image view and the 3 buttons, again, like you see here on the screen. So let's create those in code. We can do let card image view. Again, kind of similar to outlets, not quite, but you'll see the similarities. Card image view equals, and this is just an empty UI image view here. Remember, we dragged the image view onto the screen. Now we want the buttons, right? We have our image view. Now we need the 3 buttons. So let stop button equal not UI button, right? That's what you may be thinking. No, we created a custom button, remember. So CW button that we just created. Now watch when I get the initializer here. I do open parentheses. Now you can see I can just initialize just an empty CW button. This will call our configure method, but it won't have a background color set and it won't have a title. So we don't really want to do that, but we have the option to if we need to. So now if I do the open parens, and you can see I have our custom initializer right here that takes in a UI color and a title. So now we're going to initialize our 3 buttons like this. So the stop button was .system red, as you see here, and the title, pass in a string, was stop, exclamation point. And again, same thing for the rest of our buttons. So let reset button equal CW button. Again, with our custom initializer of a background color, .system green, the title here, reset. There we go. There's that button. And let rules button equal CW button with our background color. This one was .system blue. We have the autocomplete there. And again, the string title rules. So there are 3 buttons. Now, like I said before, I like to line up my equal signs. This is a style. Some people don't like this style. I think it makes things look nice and neat. There are pros and cons to it. Do it if you like. Don't do it. Fine by me. So now we have our objects created. The next step is to configure and lay out each object. So I'm going to break this out into separate functions. how you organize this code is very subjective. Some people will like it a certain way, some people like it another way. I'm going to break it out into extra steps just so it's easier to understand what's actually going on. So the first function I'm going to create is kind of like an overall function called func configure UI. So this is kind of like the overall function that configures our UI, and I'm going to make sure we call that in view.didLoad. Configure UI. There's nothing in it yet. We're about to fix that. So down here in the another function, you know what, let me go back to one space in between. I keep forgetting that my my screen resolution is so big. So we'll do func configure card image view. Okay, so now we're going to do the stuff specific to our card image view. Again, like I said, I'm breaking this out step by step. So the card image view, the first thing you want to do, and you're going to forget this, I guarantee you, when you're doing programmatic UI, you have to add the subview to the view. So we do view, I'll explain that more in a second. View.add subview, and then the view we want to add is our card image view. Remember, we created that card image view up here on line 13. So what view.add subview is, it is the equivalent of us hitting the plus button, searching for an image view, and dragging it onto the storyboard. When we drag it onto the storyboard, we're adding the subview to the view. So you're doing that exact same thing in this line of code. Just like if you never dragged a UI image view onto the screen, like you're not going to see it on your screen. If you don't do view.add subview, you're not going to see that view. And again, I guarantee you sometime throughout your career, you're going to forget to add the subview to the view, and you're going to be like, wait, where's my view? Why didn't it show up? So hugely important line of code. And again, another important line of code when you're doing your constraints is to card image view dot, remember, tamic translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals false. And again, this line basically just says, hey, use auto layout on this object. So next up, before we start doing constraints, is we want to give the image view an image. So card image view dot image equals, wait a minute. We haven't brought in our assets yet. So let's do that. Again, same thing we did in the storyboard. We're just going to drag in all of our assets to this assets folder. Again, I have them down here ready to go. So click on that, drag them in. There we go. All our assets are now in. Again, same exact thing we did for storyboard. This is repetitive. Let's go back to our card selection screen. And now we can give this a UI image named in quotation marks AS. That's the ace of spades. That's what we're going to do it there for now. So our object exists. It's in the subview. We're telling it to use auto layout, and we've given it an image. The only thing we haven't done is give it the constraints. Remember, it needs to know a width, a height, an X and Y coordinate. Well, that's what we got to do with the constraints. So here we go. Programmatic constraints. This is the big learning lesson of the next few videos. Lucky for you, we're going to get a ton of practice at it. You're even going to think, hey, this is really, really repetitive. But hey, we're going to drill the point home. So NS layout constraint is what you type. And now, remember I said a rule of thumb is 4 constraints per object. So if you do NS layout constraint dot activate, you see it takes in an array of constraints. This is where we're going to put in our 4 constraints. So do open and close brackets for the array. Now I'm going to hit return in between because I want to do this line by line, as you'll see. So what we're about to do now is the same thing we did when we hit the little TIE fighter at the bottom and pinned it to the edges and set height and width, right? Same exact thing, except in code. So the first thing we want to do on our card is set the width and height. Remember we did 250 by 350? So you do card image view dot width anchor. So anchors are the big thing that you're going to be using. So width anchor dot constraint. Remember, we're setting the constraints, and you see you get a lot of options here. Remember, because I said you can do constraints so many different ways. Well, here are all the options. We're obviously going to keep it simple. So the constraint is going to be equal to constant. So the constant we gave it, remember, was 250. That's the width. And then same thing for the height. Card image view dot height anchor dot constraint equals 350. So again, same exact thing we did in storyboard, just in code. Now we wanted to, remember, center it horizontally in the container. So you do card image view dot center X anchor, right? Center it on the X axis dot constraint equals, and sometimes the order of this gets messed up. So you may have to like scroll down for the one you're looking for. Constraint equal to, and we want to make this not equal to a constant, right? We're not putting a number in there. Remember, we said the view's center, right? So we want to do view dot center X anchor. So what this is saying is, remember how I said every view controller comes with a view that covers up the whole screen? That's what we're doing here. View.add subview, routing it to that view controller's main view. So what we're doing here is we're centering the card image view exactly with the view's center X anchor. So basically center it in the view, just like we did again with the constraints on Storyboard. Now the last thing we need, again, right, X coordinate, Y coordinate, height, width. Well, we have height, width, and X. Now we just need the Y. So card image view dot center Y anchor. Remember we centered this card image view and then moved it up 75 points? Well, that's what we're going to do here. Dot constraint. Now, not just equal to an anchor, we want to have it equal to an anchor with a constant. Again, it's down here. So you'll see equal to the anchor, which is going to be the view.center Y anchor. And then the constant, remember this is how we moved it back up, is -75. That's how we slid it up. So if that was a little bit confusing, don't worry. We're going to do that like 15 more times. So maybe not 15, a lot more times. So you're going to get plenty of practice at it. Definitely feel free to rewind the video and watch that again, but just know that we're going to be doing this a lot over the next couple videos. So now here in Configure UI, let's call configure card image view. And then configure UI gets called and view did load. So when I run this, we should see our card placed where it's placed when we did it before. And here we are, there's our card. Am I in dark mode? Command Shift A. Okay, I must have been like left over in dark mode from a previous run. Okay, I thought I messed something up. So, okay, if that happens, do Command Shift A to go back to light mode. But anyway, there's our card exactly where we laid it out when we did it in Storyboard. Except let me stop this. You see, these 4 lines of code is the equivalent to, you know, setting the height, setting the width, pinning it to the center, right? All that stuff we did, you know, from the TIE Fighter button, you just do it in code right here. Same thing. Now we configure the rest of our elements. So the next function, we'll slide up a little bit. Func configure stop button. See here, and you'll start to see why doing it programmatically adds a lot of code to your view controllers that was just done on Storyboard. So again, back to the pros and cons. Anyway, what's the first thing you need to do when doing programmatic? View.add subview stop button. Again, this is the equivalent of dragging the button onto the storyboard, right? You have to do that before you can do anything. Now, what we don't have to do, remember in the card image view, we did translates auto resizing mask into constraints. We don't have to type that line of code here. Why? If you remember, back in CW button, we included that line in our configure, translates auto resizing mask into constraints. So every CW button is already going to have this set to false. So that way we don't have to write this code. Again, that's a way to be dry, right? Don't repeat yourself. Another benefit of creating, a subclass. All that code lives in CW button. We don't have to retype it. So all that leaves for us, at least for now, is setting the constraints. So again, ns layout constraint dot activate, and this takes an array of constraints. Very similar, right? Like I said, this is going to get repetitive, but again, repetition is key. So we do stop button dot width anchor. Remember, we set the dot constraint. We set the width equal to 260. Same thing we did in Storyboard, and we set the height to 50. So let's do that too. Stop button dot height anchor dot constraint equals 50. Cool, cool, cool. Now what else did we do? Right, we centered it on the x-axis. So stop button dot center x anchor dot constraint is equal to, again, we want to pass in the layout anchor view dot center x anchor. And then now we need a y-axis. Well, we pinned it to the bottom of the card image view. Now, this is a key point when doing your layout programmatically, is that the order matters, right? Like, let me type this out and then explain that. So stop button dot top anchor. So the top of the stop button, we want to pin to, again, passing an anchor and a constant. We want to pin it to card image view dot bottom anchor. So we're pinning it to the bottom of the card image view. And I believe we did like 30. It's irrelevant. So anyway, the thing I wanted to point out was the order matters, right? I can't pin anything to the bottom of the card image view until the card image view is laid out, right? Because if the card image view doesn't know where it's at on the screen, I can't pin the stop button to the bottom of it. It looks like I'm getting yelled at because I don't have a comma there. So anyway, the order in which you lay it out matters. And if you remember when we laid this out via Storyboard, I said like we did the card image view first because that was kind of like our anchor of our UI. We were going to be pinning everything else to that. So again, that's why we configured the card image view first and then the stop button. And where the order comes into play, you can see we're going to call configure card image view and then we're going to call configure stop button. So right, so the card image view gets configured and then the stop button gets configured. So that ensures the order that we're looking at here. So now that we've called it, let's run this and we should see our stop button on our app. We don't. Crash. Well, not a crash, but some constraints are messed up. So let's see here. Okay, so usually when you see all this, right, this means you forgot to set auto resizing mask equals to false, tamic, right? Let's get rid of this. But remember, I did this in the CW button, right? Oh man, translates auto resizing mask constraints into false. But what I forgot to do in the last video, and again, just to show you how easily bugs can come up, I like to keep these mistakes in there so you don't think you have to be perfect as a programmer. Trust me, ask any programmer that's been doing this long. They make silly mistakes nonstop all day, every day. They say programming sometimes will make you feel like the smartest person alive and then also like the dumbest person alive. So the mistake I made was super simple, right? Remember in this initial initializer, right, our default one, I called configure method. Well, in this custom initializer method, look, I forgot to call configure. So it did call this initializer, but it didn't call the configure method to do all of our other stuff here, which includes translates auto resizing mask into constraints. So now by calling configure in this initializer, and remember, we're using this initializer up here, configure was never getting called is basically what I'm trying to say here. So now when we run it, it will call configure. We're going to translate the auto resizing mask into constraints. And as you can see, there's our stop button. So let's keep it moving. Keep going on with the rest of the buttons here. So do func configure reset button. And very similar stuff. Right? Most important thing, view.add subview reset button. And now we need to lay out the constraints. So ns layout constraint, again, repetitive, but you're going to get practice, right? And that's good. You're going to be good at it. Pass in the array, go down to the next line, and here we go. So now we do reset button dot, right? We have the width. So width anchor dot constraint. Remember it was 115. And then we also had the height, which was 50. So reset button dot height anchor dot constraint equals 50. So we had the width and height. Now these constraints get a little different. If you remember, we pinned the left side of the reset button to the leading anchor of the stop button. So I'll show you how to do that. So reset button dot leading anchor. Remember, leading was on the left, again in a left to right language. Dot constraint equals stop button, right? We want to pin it to the stop button's dot leading anchor. So again, this is going to line up the left sides of the button. And actually the constant is 0. So anytime a constant is 0, you don't have to have it. I accidentally selected the wrong one. So that's going to line up the left sides of the button, which is exactly what we wanted. Now we just need the Y coordinate, which again, we pinned it to the top, to the bottom of the stop button. So reset button dot top anchor dot constraint is equal to, again, I hate when these get mixed up, but no, that it was actually right at the top. So stop button dot bottom anchor, and then the constant, I believe we did 20. So now our reset button is configured. Again, a width of 115, a height of 50. We aligned the left sides or the leading sides of to the stop button, and then we pinned it to the bottom of the stop button. Now, that should all be familiar to exactly what we did in the storyboard. Again, just doing it in code. Like I said, some people like that storyboard, how it's all visual, and some people like being able to see the code right in front of them so they can see what's going on without it being kind of like magically hidden away in the storyboard. Now let's call configure reset button. So configure reset button. Now that's getting called in our configure UI method, which again is getting called in view.load. Let's run it, and we should see our reset button. There we go. There's reset. So let's stop it. And again, it's all configured with the green and the reset because we did that up here when we initially created the objects. So the last thing we're going to do is add our rules button. And now I've been typing these out individually to kind of show you. Oftentimes in the real world, I do a lot of copying and pasting when it comes to constraints because you'll see that's a lot of similar code here. So copy, paste. Now, copy paste errors are a thing. You're going to make a lot of them. So anytime you copy and paste like this, be very, very careful and double check. So instead of configure reset button, we want this to be configure rules button. Cool. And then view.add subview, double click on reset button, make that rules button. And then there is an edit all in scope. I believe it's like Command-Shift-E, I think. I don't know. We can look up that shortcut later. But I just prefer, it's quicker for me. I hold Option, drag down like that, and just type rules button. There we go. Now, let's go line by line here. Our width anchor, that is the same. Remember, 115. Our height, that is the same, 50. However, we're not pinning it to the leading of the stop button. We're pinning it to the trailing of the stop button. So double click on leading anchor, change it to trailing anchor, and then same thing, equal to stop button dot trailing anchor. Because remember, we're pinning it to the right side of the stop button now for our rules button. And then rules button, top anchor constraint, same thing. Pinning it to the bottom of the stop button at 20. Again, same thing as the reset button. So now let's stop this and run it, and we should have, oh, nope, almost had the mistake there. I caught myself. Remember I said you're going to forget to call your functions all the time. So we got to call configure rules button. So again, configure rules button. And real quick, kind of how I like my functions to read is I compare it to a table of contents, right? Like I like people to come to see, okay, what's configure UI? Okay, I'm configuring card image view. I'm configuring the stop button. I'm configuring reset button. I'm configuring rules button. And if that's all they need to know, cool, they can move on to reading the rest of your code. However, if they want to dig in like, okay, so there must be an issue with how we're configuring the stop button, cool, I can just dig into the stop button function. And how you do that, by the way, if you hold Command and click on the function, you'll get a menu here and click jump to definition and well, it was right there. But if it's in another file or something like that, it'll take you to that file so you can see what's actually going on in configure stop button and you can see what's going on. But again, back to the table of contents, you don't want to just have this super long, huge function because that's really hard to read. Give them like the list of commands that are going on. And if the reader of the code wants to dig deeper, now they can by going into each function. All right, rant over. Let's run this and see what we got. We should be done here with this video. Yep, there it is. Stop, reset rules. Our UI is laid out programmatically, good to go. Again, picking right up where we left off from the last video. In this video, we're going to create our rules screen. And remember on Storyboard, like we didn't have to do any code at all. We could just configure it all on Storyboard. Well, that's not quite the case here. Let's start building that. Click on your card workout folder. Again, Command N. Cocoa Touch class. We need to create the view controller. So let's call this the rules VC for rules view controller. Now remember, it's not a subclass of UI button. Make sure you check that. I've done that 1,000 times where I forgot to do that and created the wrong thing. UI view controller. And I hate that it does that. It adds view controller to the end of it. Nope. We just want rules VC. Hit next. Hit create. Cool, here's our empty rules VC. And let's not forget to give it a background color, background view.background color equals .system background. There we go. And again, the system background, white and light mode, black and dark mode. Now, in order to see this screen, right, when we run our app, right, let's do this. We run the app. Okay, rules. Well, remember we created a segue in the storyboard? Well, we can't do that in code. Segues. The concept of a segue doesn't exist when you do everything in code. Like segues are only for interface builder, storyboard. You can still obviously transition to screens, but they're not called segues. Okay, so the concept of a segue is only in storyboard, does not exist when you do it in code. So hit stop. So we need to transition to that screen. So let's actually move this up before I forget and hit card selection VC. Now we need to add an action to our rules button. So scroll down to your rules button. The way we can add an action, like what happens when the button is tapped, is we can do rules button.add target. And you can see we get the parameters here. The target is self for the view controller. Action, remember hashtag selector. This is where we have to pass in an @objc method. So let's do hashtag selector. And let's create that @objc method here. We'll do that at the bottom because this is a simple present. So we can do @objc func, and we'll say present rules VC. And here in this function, we'll do, every view controller has this function called present, which is how they present a view controller. So you can see present down here, and it takes in a view controller to present, and you can see animated and completion. Hit return. So the view controller we want to pass in is a rules VC here, and we can initialize an empty one. More on that in a second. Animated is true. That means we do want it to slide up. And then completion handler, we're not doing anything with that, so we can actually delete that parameter. Now, if we were passing data or configuring this rules VC, like right now we just configured this, but this is kind of similar to that prepare for segue. If we wanted to, we could do let rules VC equals, initialize an empty rules VC. And then remember how on the table view we had the variable of color that we had to change? You would do rules vc.color. Obviously we don't have that variable, but I'm showcasing how you can pass data here. And instead of initializing this rules VC here, you would pass in the rules VC that we created that has like our custom data and everything like that. But again, because we're not passing any data, we're not doing anything, we can initialize the rules VC right here, make it a capital R. So it's the class. And there we go. So again, what this says, I hope that didn't confuse you. If it did, comments, Slack, happy to help. But we're presenting a brand new rules VC, and it's going to be animated. So let's call this up here in our target. Let's call present rules VC and touch up inside. Remember when we created our action, we had to pick one of these, and it was always touch up inside. Like that's the default. So there you go, touch up inside. So now our rules button has a target that when we tap our rules button, it's going to fire off present rules VC, and present rules VC again presents the view controller. Remember, presenting is modally. If we were in a navigation controller, we wouldn't use present, we would use navigation controller dot push view controller, and we would pass that view controller in there, rules VC. We're not in a view controller, so this won't work. That is actually why view navigation controller is optional, right? Because we're not in a navigation controller, but every view controller does have that function. But again, we're presenting this one, so it's sliding up from the bottom. So let's run it. And here now when we tap rules, there we go. Our sheet slides up, and if in iOS 13, we can slide it down. Rules, slide it down. I don't know why the simulator is not animating it, but that's a simulator issue. So let's run it again. Rules, there we go, slid up and down. So now that we can actually see our rules sheet, let's go into our rules VC and start configuring it so when we test it, we can actually see it. Now, just like we did before, let's create 3 labels. So let title label equal, and again, it's just an empty UI label because we didn't create any custom labels for this. We potentially could have, like I thought about doing that, but I'll talk more about that once we have these all configured. So we're just going to use regular UI labels for this. So let rules label, I misspelled label up here, EL, equal UI label. And let exercise label equal UI label here. So we're just creating the objects, and we'll have to configure them and lay them out in constraints later on in other functions. So like I said, this is kind of preference. I'm not going to create that overall configure UI method. We're just going to configure them individually just to show you multiple different ways to do it. Use whatever you like best. So let's do func configure title label. And now let's call this here in view to load before I forget. Configure title label. Wow, I keep misspelling label. EL. EL. There we go. And then now we do our configuration for the title label. Now this is a little bit more in depth, but again, the first thing you always have to do, don't forget this, view.add subview title label. And then also title label dot translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals false. Now we start configuring the properties of our title label. Let's start with what it says first. So title label dot text is what it says. And if you remember, this just says rules. Pretty simple there. We also need like what font and what font size it is. So title label dot font equals dot system font of size. We also want weight. We want to remember this was bold. So the size was 40, right? This was the big rules label at the top. And the font weight, again, if you tap the period, you can see all the different kinds. We want to be bold here. If you remember, this was also centered, right? It's not align left. So you can do text alignment. Title label dot text alignment equals dot center. There we go. Now you're starting to see, right? When you were doing this in Storyboard, you just had all these drop downs that you could set this. Here you got to set each one in code. So that's all the configuration we need. Now let's do the constraints. Here we can do ns layout constraint.activate. Again, told you, repetitive. We're going to do this a lot. Not curly braces, just brackets. So this was, I believe, 50 or 70 from the bottom. I mean, we can tweak it and dial it in. Title label top anchor constraint, and we're going to pin this to. It's going to be a little different. Remember, we use the safe area, so we do view dot, and then if you type safe area layout guide, you can see that. So this is pinning it to the safe area, and we want to pin it to the top anchor of the safe area. And again, that's the deal with the notch. And then the constant, let's do 60. I can't remember if it was 50 or 70, so we'll split the difference. And make sure you put a comma in there, because again, this is an array. So now this was title label dot leading anchor. Remember, we pinned it 30 to the left and 30 to the right, the leading and trailing. So leading anchor dot constraint is equal to the anchor with a constant, view dot leading anchor. So remember, we pinned it to the left of the view and we gave it a constraint of 30. So again, I'm kind of going quickly because again, we've done constraints a lot by now. And again, this is the same thing we did in Storyboard by pinning it to the left and the right. So can you think of what's next? The trailing anchor, right? So title label dot trailing anchor dot constraint, again, equal to the anchor and the constant. So view dot trailing anchor this time. Now, here's the tricky thing. With trailing anchors, and if you're pinning it to the bottom, you have to use negative numbers. So negative 30. Remember that. Trailing and bottom, you have to use negative. Have to do with the coordinate system. So now we need, well, no, we don't need a height. Remember, the label does the intrinsic content size, so we don't have to give it a height. So again, the labels, again, one of those ones where you don't need the 4 constraints. Remember I said the 4 constraints was a rule of thumb that it would be mostly correct. This is the case where it's not. So we have our title label. We've called it in view to load. if we run this, we should see our rules title label there. So run. Okay, let's tap the rules button. There we go. Perfect. Rules. Tap the rules button, slides up, rules. Cool. Now we need our, I called it the rules label because that actually tells the rules. And then we have our exercise label to do, which shows, what a heart, diamond, and spade represents. So let's start doing those. We just need to configure 2 more labels. So func configure rules label. Same thing, view.add subview rules label. Got to make sure we're dragging it onto the screen and dropping it. Again, set the tamic. You can start actually type tamic and it'll do it. Equals false. Remember, if you forget that line of code, your layout's going to be all messed up. And trust me, you will forget that line of code. Let's talk about the text now. So title label.text, and I'm using the title label as kind of like my structure here. I'm just going down the line to make sure I'm hitting what we need. So .text. Now this text is a little longer. The value of each card represents the number of exercise you do. And now here's how you do a line break. If you remember in Storyboard, we had to hold Control and hit return to get the line break in our text. So you can do /n. To be honest, is that / or /? I get those mixed up, right? Because it depends on how you look at it, right? It's going down and forward to the angle, or it's leaning backwards. I get them mixed up. If it's a / and I called it /, my bad. It's a 30-year habit I've got. So /n, that'll give us 1 line break. We want to add 2 line breaks in there to give us a space. So now we can do and this is going to line wrap here. This is Jack equals 11, comma space, Queen equals 12, comma space, King equals 13, comma space, Ace equals 14. Scroll up a little bit there so you can see. So that is our text. Now we want to text a line, right? We align the center. So title label dot text alignment equals center dot center, not just center. So that's all we had here for oh no, we forgot font. Remember, that's what I said. I always look at my other labels to make sure I hit everything. So let's put font here. So title label dot font, and again that is going to equal dot system font. Size and weight. This was size 19, if you remember, and the weight was semi-bold. It wasn't bold. Okay, so, but because this is 2 lines, remember we're missing that number of lines, right? If you just leave it default, number of lines is 1, and then it'll truncate the tail. So here we can do 2 things, right? Title label dot line break mode equals remember this was by truncating tail or by word wrapping. We have to set this to word wrapping, so it'll wrap based on the word, and then also number of lines. Title label dot number of lines equals 0. Remember when we did 0, it'll automatically adjust. If you wanted to hard code it so it only shows 4 lines and then truncates the tail, like if somebody wrote a huge long paragraph, that's why you would do 4. But we want 0. We want this to adapt. Technically, we could hard code it to 2 because we know it's 2 lines, but we'll do 0 so it automatically adjusts. So that configures our rules label. Nope, we didn't do the constraints. So that configures like all the custom stuff we need to do. But now, again, repetition, ns layout constraint dot activate, and start passing in this array here. Again, title label dot top anchor dot constraint is equal to. This is the bottom of the the title label. So title label dot bottom anchor, and that constant I believe was like 25. I might be getting these wrong, but it's roughly the same. It's not going to make a difference. Title label, remember we did the same thing. Leading anchor was 30 and trailing anchor was 30. So dot constraint view dot leading anchor equals 30, comma. Oh, I keep doing title label. Wow, good catch, Sean. I wonder if anybody caught that. This is actually rules label. And Command C, Command V, double click Command V, double click Command V. Again, I could have held Option. I could have done rename all in scope. So many ways to change this. Again, I'm in this habit. I'm quick at it. I just do it that way. So, wow, I was doing title label the whole time. This is the rules label dot trailing anchor. Let me scroll up here. Dot constraint equal to view dot trailing anchor -30. Again, remember I said silly mistakes. Programs do it all the time. Because you see, this is like repetitive, mind-numbing code. It's very easy to make mistakes like that. So rules label. Nope, we don't need a height. Again, intrinsic content size with the label, we don't need a height. So let me make sure I call configure rules label up here in view to load, configure rules label, and let's run it, and we should have our rules label in place now below our title. Yep, rules, title. The value of each card represents the number of exercises you do. Again, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. Cool, cool, cool. The last thing we need is our exercise label that shows what a spade is, what a diamond represents, and all that stuff. So let's do that. Now, again, I'm going to use some copy and paste because you know what? It's quicker. So again, be very, very careful when you do copy and paste. Make sure you go line by line. So this is no longer configure rules label. This is configure exercise label. Again, view.addSubView, not rules label, exercise label. And hold option, highlight these, exercise label, hold option. Again, I know people are sitting there yelling at their screen. Use edit all in scope. I know. Bad habits die hard. Exercise label. Okay, so we just renamed all those. However, we're gonna have to go line by line to make sure we have what we need. So exercise label, Tamic, yes, we need that. Exercise label text, no, this is different. So let's delete this. So again, Command Control Space to pull up your emojis, my frequently used, spade space equals, push, ups, and then /n, again, to get that extra space. Command Shift Space to get the heart, space equals sit ups, again /n. There are ways, I believe it was introduced in Swift 5, to do multi-line strings. For something this simple, I just prefer to do this, but there are ways to do multi-line strings. Maybe you want to Google that. That was new in Swift 5. For something, again, something so simple and short like this, I just prefer this. So sit-ups, and now we need clubs. Space equals, this is burpees, and again /n, and this is diamonds, and equals jumping jacks. Okay, so now the system font was 19, semi-bold, that was the same. Text alignment was not center, text alignment was actually left, and to be honest with you, we can actually delete this line because left is the default. Line break mode by word wrapping. We're not word wrapping this. There's no line breaks on this label because we're hard coding things because we always know it's going to be the same size. Number of lines does need to be 0, again, because this is multi-lines. So now let's go to our constraints. The top anchor, we don't want to pin it to the bottom of the title label. We want to pin it to the bottom of the rules label and say 25, keep it consistent. Now, this label is not actually pinned 30 to the left and 30 to the right. Remember, we hard coded the width because we wanted to place it at a certain spot visually to the eye. But that was just all design. So let's actually delete these constraints and do the width anchor dot constraint equal to constant 200, comma, and then we centered it x on the x-axis. So exercise label dot center x anchor dot constraint is equal to view dot center x anchor. And we don't have to give it a height because, again, number of lines is 0, intrinsic content size. Now, I do want to say something. When you're dealing with labels, we're not going to get into this in this exposure beginner course, but I don't know if you're familiar with dynamic type on the iPhone, where people can change the size of their text. Like, have you ever looked at somebody's phone and their text is all blown up? Well, you have to be real careful to handle that with how you lay out your UI and your labels. That is way beyond the scope of this beginner course. But if you do have experience with that and you're like, hey, you didn't handle dynamic type, like, I know, I get it. We're just not doing that yet. Again, you have to learn to crawl before you can walk, and then walk before you can run. Like I said, this is a process. This is an evolution. This is just your first exposure. But again, that does illustrate like how deep app development actually goes. Like it's pretty deep, and we're just scratching the surface here. So let's call configure exercise label. Bam. Let's run it here on our iPhone 11 Pro. Hit rules, slides up. Cool, now you can see this. Now, okay, I messed up. We did 25. We pinned the top of this exercise label, 25 from the bottom of our rules label. To me, that feels too cramped. That was actually more. So I believe it was like 50 or 60. So again, exercise label, rules.bottom anchor. Let's change this. Instead of 25, let's change this to 60. And again, this is also the power of doing your UI programmatically, right? For me to simply change a constraint, I can like toy around with these and change them real quick to dial it in. Whereas on the storyboard, it's kind of a pain, right? You got to click on the object, go to the ruler tab, find the constraint, edit the thing, right? You can really quickly edit your UI just by changing some numbers around when you do it in code. Of course, the initial setup takes longer, but I view it as like an investment. Like, yes, it takes longer to set up, but making changes, making additions, so much faster, in my opinion. So now let's run this again, and we're going to see our rules, Now we've moved that down a little bit. Okay, good to go. So as you can see, that laid out our rule sheet, but let's take a look at this. Remember, in Storyboard, there was no code at all. We just laid all that out on the storyboard. Now, when we stop this, like, let's look at all the code we had to do just to replicate that simple screen, which we did relatively quickly and simply just in Storyboard. Like, remember, on the Storyboard project, we didn't even have a view controller called Rules VC. We didn't need one. So again, pros and cons. Again, that's why it's a debate. Like, sometimes Storyboard is quicker and easier. Sometimes code is better. So like I said, that's why a lot of people disagree, and that's why it's pretty subjective. But we have our rule sheet. Let's run it real quick to leave it up there. That is laid out. All we have to do now is start doing the logic of the app. Let's go. Again, here we are right where we left off. Now, all the programmatic UI, well, 99% of it is done. We still got to add some button targets to the other buttons, but essentially at this point, all you have to do is add the logic that we did in our storyboard. So here's a little challenge for you. If you'd like, try to finish this project on your own before watching this video, getting it up and running in the programmatic project. Okay, pause it now. Sure, pause, done. All right, if you did that, hope that went well. If not, this was just like 2 seconds ago. Now it's weird. Anyway, let's move on. We're gonna do this together here. We're gonna finish up this project. So let's run this just to get a state of the union real quick. Where are we at? So when we tap rules, we can see our rule sheet that's working, stop and reset. So we have to implement our timer and then the array of all the card images so that it can cycle through. And then, stop it with the buttons and reset it with the buttons. So first thing I'm going to do is create our card struct. Well, I'm going to rename it because that was a horrible, horrible name. Naming is hard. Anyway, so in the folder, do Command N, it's new Swift file, hit next. I'm going to call this card deck. That's what I should have called it last time. This is going to have card deck.allValues. Like I said, naming can be difficult. So that's called card deck, import UI kit. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste this from the previous project. I suggest you do the same. I'm not typing this out again. So here, return, paste. This is the card from the storyboard project. Again, we're going to name this card deck. So here is the array. Again, we went over this, typed it all out last video. We're going to save some time in this video because it's the same. And a lot of this is the same as well. So back to our, we'll move this up a little bit too. Back to our card selection VC, up at the top, part of our variables here, we need a variable, an array called cards, which is an array of type UI image. And that is going to equal card deck dot all values, right? What we had there. And to be honest with you, we don't need to declare the type here. We can just do cards equals card deck dot all values. If you want, right? Because you don't, just looking at this, you don't know what card deck dot all values is. Like, what is that an array of? If you've built the app, you know what it is, but you understand how this could be confusing. So leaving the type declaration there is a way that you can easily see, like, oh, okay, this is my array of UI images that I'm using. So if you think that makes more readable code, leave it there. If you want it to be a little more clean, just do that. And I'm going to line up my equal signs. The other thing we're going to need is our timer. So var, again, this is just repeating what we did before. Var timer of type timer and exclamation point. And we need to start our timer down here. Now, the way I like to lay out my code, right? You see we have all this UI code. I like to push that towards the bottom because, I like the logic and the functionality of my view controller to be up top because that's usually what you work with a lot. And then if I need to change my UI, I know I go to the bottom. So I'm going to start putting all these other functions up here towards the top. So we need func start timer. And then remember we did timer equals, and then we initialized a timer dot scheduled timer, and we did the one with the selector. So remember, time interval 0.1. Again, this is all review. Target self selector, hashtag selector. Now we need that at objc method. So we want to fire off show random card. So at objc func show random card. And then remember in the show random card function, it was card image view dot image equals cards our array dot random element. There we go. So let's finish up this function signature here. Again, hashtag selector. We want to pass in show random card. Again, this is exactly what we did in the previous project. User is nil, repeat, true. So now that timer fires off. We're going to change that. Let's test it. Again, you always want to be testing your code along the way. I bet I didn't call start timer. Again, it's going to happen to you all the time. So after configure UI, call start timer. Now run it. Again, silly mistakes all the time. There we go. Now hit stop. We don't have the stop button set up. Okay, so that's what we got to do. But we know our timer is working as expected. So again, piece by piece. So now we need to handle the stop and restart button. So we need to put action or targets on those buttons. Sometimes I call them actions. Based on the storyboard, it's an IB action, but we need to add a target to the buttons. So our stop button here, configure stop button, just like we did with the rules button down here, where we did rules button.add target. Here's how we add the target here. Stop button.add target. Here we go. Target is self action hashtag selector. Again, here's where we need to pass in an objc method. What we want to do is we want to stop the timer. So again, we have a function called start timer, func stop timer, except this function needs to be at objc. Remember, when we're using these hashtag selectors, we're interacting with Objective-C, again, at a lower level, not at our high level here. So that's why we have to declare this as an at objc method. So stop timer, see if you remember, it was just timer.invalidate. Again, same exact thing. So for the stop button, we want to pass in stop timer that we just created up there, and for.touchUpInside, right? That's the default for the button. So what we did here, we added a target to the stop button that fires off start timer when the touch up inside, which is just a normal press. So now we need to handle the reset button. So here in the configure reset function, do reset button.add target self for the view controller, hashtag selector. Again, we need another at objc method. This method is going to stop the timer and then restart it. So let's create a method here right below stop timer. And again, I'm breaking these out. You could write some clever functions to combine these, but I'm just writing these out so you can see the steps of what is actually going on. So reset timer. So what happens in reset timer? Just like I said, first we stop the timer, so we can call that function. We can call stop timer. And then after we stop the timer, we restart it. So do start timer. There you go. So that is our reset timer function. And down here in the at objc method of the reset button, we can do reset timer. And then again, that is also for .touchUpInside, which again is the default tap, the normal button tap. So our buttons should be working now. Let's run it and test it out. Okay, it's cycling through. Stop. Cool. Stop works. Does reset work? Hit reset. Reset worked great. Hit reset again. Cool. It's stopping and restarting that timer. Stop. Reset. Cool. Stop. Rules. Nice. Let's do the old Command Shift A for dark mode. Looks good. Reset. Looking good in dark mode. Stop. Rules. Cool. Our app is up and running, 100% programmatic. So now that you've had a taste of both worlds, you can start forming your own opinions and what you like more. Here's what I always recommend. For those that are just learning, I find programmatic is the better way to learn because you start seeing what's going on under the hood, so to speak, right? It's easy on the storyboard for it to be like magic. Like, I don't know, the storyboard handles it, but you don't really know what's going on. However, when you're laying out all your constraints in code, you're adding targets to the button, you can see what's going on under the hood. And I think you learn the fundamentals a lot better when you do programmatic. Now, once you've learned programmatic and you're more experienced and you can do both, no problem, that's when at least what I do, I've shifted towards what I call using the right tool for the right job. And again, a lot of my projects are a mix of both Programmatic UI and code. And the perfect example is that rule sheet. Let's run it here. So if I was building this project for real, and this was like a real app I was building, like I said, I usually do a hybrid of Storyboard and UI. So the rule sheet would absolutely 100% be done on Storyboard. Like I'd have no code for that, right? Because again, that's the super simple layout. You don't need code. And this screen, I don't know, it depends on what else would be on the screen. I guess the only hard and fast one I know for sure, I would be doing this 100% Storyboard. But again, those are just my opinions and how I like to program. The point of me showing you both, like I've said 35 times by now, start forming your own opinion. And that's a corollary for just programming in general. Like I've said before, it is a very opinionated field. You're going to see things online. People are like, no, this is wrong. This is the worst way to do it. This is bad. And you'll see somebody else saying, no, that's the best way. again, very opinionated. I find the best way to deal with that is to educate yourself, try the methods, and form your own opinion, right? I guess the moral of my little rant here, don't just blindly listen to people on the internet. Because again, if you listen to one person, you'll find another experienced, reputable dev that will think the exact opposite. So that's why it's a tricky field, very subjective. But again, educate yourself, form your own opinions. We are done with the card app. Cool. Again, you saw it both ways. Now we're going to move on to the new hotness, Swift UI. In the last video, I showed you how to use the new button configurations in Storyboard. I also gave the overview of what these buttons are, showed you the WWDC videos, so if you skipped that one, I'd recommend going back and at least checking out the beginning where I explain everything. Because in this video, we're going to do the same thing we did in that video, however, everything will be done via code and not Storyboard. Again, keeping with the thought process of doing it both ways, and then you deciding if you like Storyboard better or code better, or at least you just know how to do it both ways. Anyway, here we are in the card selection VC. So as you can see, we are initializing 3 CW buttons here, right? Again, this is the old code that we had. By the way, I didn't mention that. This is the existing card workout project in Programmatic UI, completely done, which you should have from the previous videos. Okay, so all the work is going to be done in this CW button class, which we created down here, if you remember, right? This is our custom button. So essentially what we're going to do is get rid of this configure method because we're not configuring it ourselves. We're using the new button configuration, and all that will be done in the initializer. So that's the big picture what we're going to do. Now let's start coding it up. So the first thing we want to do, let's just make some space. I'm going to be like deleting and commenting stuff out as we go. But the first thing we want to do in our initializer is decide which configuration it is. So we'll say configuration equals, and I'll do dot, and you can see these are the styles, right? Dot tinted, well, there's more styles here. Filled, gray, plain, right? That's what we worked with in Storyboard. I showcased what they are in the last video, so we'll just skip right to what we're doing, and that is the tinted configuration. So now here, we're going to do, configuration dot, and then you're going to see all the properties we got in the Storyboard. I'll put a little screenshot of the right pane that we were working with in the last video. Basically, all that stuff is the same, just now in code. So we're going to recreate what we did last time in code. So let's handle our background color and our foreground color first. Remember, the foreground color is the text. And because we're doing tinted, these are going to be the same color. So we want to set our base foreground color equal to, remember this initializer, we're passing in the background color. Well, because we're switching to tinted buttons, background color isn't really accurate, right? We just want to call this color, right? To be clear here. So color is what we're going to pass in, and I want to make this equal to color. And then the same thing down here, configuration dot base background color equals color. Because again, remember the background and the foreground are the same color in our tinted configuration. Good catch here. Configuration is only available in iOS 15 or newer. Well, this is the what's new in iOS 15 section, but why are we getting that error? That's because I pulled up the old project, maybe the one that you're pulling up as well, and that supports iOS 13. So in our card workout target here, right, iOS deployment target, let's change that to iOS 15, and then targets card workout, we need to, that is already targeting iOS 15. So I don't think I did that in the Storyboard version because I think maybe I had done that off camera. So my apologies if there was confusion there. I'll be sure to make a note in the edit of that video to make sure you don't run into that issue. Anyway, so now that we're supporting iOS 15, back to CW button. Let's do a Command B to hopefully get rid of those errors. Okay, well, we got plenty of other errors because we're in the middle of revamping our buttons, but we took care of that one. So we have the background color and the foreground color. Now let's take care of some of the other properties, right? We had the corner style property, right? Our corner radius. So configuration dot corner style equals, and then if I do dot, remember medium, capsule, dynamic, small, large, do whatever you like, but we're gonna go with medium. And then that sets the base status of the button. So actually let's pause here before we do the image and make sure this is all working, get this going. So before we add the image, I can get rid of all the, not quite, look, set title. That's what we're not doing yet. See, we're passing in a title, but we're not setting it. So I can do that here. I'm gonna do that at the top because that's pretty important. Configuration.title, there you go, equals title. And that is whatever string we pass in, we're setting that title. So this is actually a good way to check as well, right? Before you delete the old code, make sure you're handling it. Well, we're handling the background color, cool. We're handling the title, and then configure, which is down here. We need to make sure we handle all of that. Okay, so let's delete that. Let's take a look through the configure method. We're handling the corner radius, right, in our corner style. Cool, can delete that. Can delete the font. That is the default. Again, we're working with like default Apple style, right? That's the trade-off you make when you go with these configurations. Set title color. That's our foreground color, setting our font color. Translates auto or Tamic, whatever. We're still going to need that, so I'm going to bring that up into our initializer, and then I can delete this configure method altogether, which will remove it from up here as well. So we're simplifying our code because, again, the trade-off is we don't have to set all this stuff ourselves. We're using these configurations to get the default Apple look of the tinted style. So we'll do a Command B, and we have 6 errors. So that's going to be in our card selection VC. And you see here is because we changed the initializer of our CW button, right? It's not background color anymore. It's just color. So what I can do is change this to color, double click to copy, double click paste, paste. Do a Command B. Remember, all we did was just change that to color. Okay, that should work for now. And once we make sure we have no errors, cool. Again, this is just checking to make sure it works before we add our images. So I'm going to run it. And here you go, our app is running. We haven't set our images yet, but you can see our buttons are now that default tint style. And they still work, right? Stop, reset, rules, cool. Okay, so everything's still working. Now we just want to add those images like we did in the storyboard version, right? Okay, so stop there. And it is always good practice to kind of like check to make sure your stuff is still working along the way rather than building forever. That way, if there's a bug, like you know where the bug is if you kind of run it to make sure things are working. So we know we got our button working with just color and title. Now let's add the image. Back to CW button. Again, it's just more configuration stuff, right? So configuration, I don't know why I put it on a separate line, but we can do image, right? And that is going to equal a UI image. And then the initializer on that is, this is new, I don't think we covered this before, system name, right? You're going to see one just called named. I think we did that before. We want system name. And what system name is, that gives us the SF symbol that I mentioned before. Now, in the storyboard, we just had the drop down and we got all that kind of for free. SF symbols was kind of built into storyboard. But for us to look at it, it's a separate program. You can just copy the string that I do. I'm going to link to my video, YouTube video on SF symbols that does a deep dive. I don't want to derail this path because all you really need is the string. But to find the string, we need to go into SF symbols. So here I am in SF symbols, right? Just like we did on storyboard, I'm going to search stop. Here we go. I got the stop in a circle here. So you see it's stop.circle. You can do Command-Shift-C to copy. Command-Shift-C, not just Command-C. Command-Shift-C to copy, and that'll give you stop.circle, or you can just remember stop.circle. I like to copy and paste just in case. So there you go. Or actually, you know what? I'm silly. We don't need to put that in here now. We just need to pass in an image name, right? Because these buttons are dynamic, right? Whatever image name we pass in, that's what we're going to set. That would set all of my buttons to stop circle. So I need another parameter here. I need to pass in color, title, and then I'm going to call it system image name. That way I know it's an SF symbol and I don't just pass in a random string. So now instead of stop circle here, I'll do system image name. So that way whatever image name we pass in, that's what the button will populate. And then I'll scroll up a little bit and then just like before, right, we needed to give our image some padding, right? So we did configuration dot image padding. There you go. And again, this is all doing the same stuff that we did in storyboard, just doing it in code. So now we'll just give it a 5. And you can tweak this number to get the padding you like. Remember how we were just tapping the arrows in storyboard, or you're just entering a number here. And then lastly, something we didn't cover in the storyboard, but I'll show you here, we can do image placement, right? And well, what is image placement? Dot, you see I can do trailing, leading, bottom, top. So before our image was to the left of the title, right? That would be leading, and I think that's the default. Well, you can make it, you can put the image on top, you can put the image on the bottom, trailing. We'll do trailing just to show you what it is. And now you should see we're going to get some errors because we changed the initializer on our CW buttons, right? We're now passing in a system image name. So if I go to my card selection VC, yep, it's saying we're missing the argument system image name. So let's add that here, fix. Okay, so the red stop one, again, was, we'll paste this in now, stop.circle, right? Remember we looked that up. So reset, let's go back to SF symbols, and I will search for refresh, just like we did on the storyboard. No, oh, there it goes. Took a second. And that was the arrow clockwise circle. I don't think we did the circle last time, but we'll stay consistent. So Command-Shift-C, now you can see why I want to copy these because that's quite a long name. Alt-Tab back to Xcode. And then we'll add the parameter here, fix. And then the string we want to do is Command-V for arrow.clockwise.circle. And then we'll do the same thing for rules, which we had a list. I'm not sure if there's a circle version of list. We'll see here. List. No, there is no, we got different lists before. Who cares? I won't waste the time with this, but we'll do list.bullet. And again, we lost our circle consistency, but you can play around in SF symbols and find some symbols you like to style your buttons here. Command V, list.bullet, do a Command B. Okay, so now, again, our initializer on our CW button now takes in a system image name, which we passed in. And now when I run it, we're gonna see the images on the trailing side, right? See how we set it up? Now they're to the right. You could put them on the top, you could put them on the bottom, you could put them on the left. So that's more customization on these buttons. So again, that's the new button configuration in code. Quick review here. Again, we just created a configuration. We did .tinted. Again, you could do .filled, .gray. You would have to change, your styling based on that. But based on our tinted styling, we set title, foreground color, back color, all those properties you saw on the right in the storyboard are here in code as well, so you could do it this way, whichever you prefer. And then as you saw, our app is running as expected with the new styles. So hope you enjoy the new buttons in iOS 15. I think it's a great way to get that default Apple look, and we don't have to build it ourselves anymore.